All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 80 for November 1st, 2025. Happy 250th anniversary, 1st City Troop. Welcome to All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories, a monthly cemetery podcast that explores the lives and the times of people buried at Laurel Hill East in Philadelphia and Laurel Hill West in Bala-Cynwyd. They're both in Pennsylvania, by the way. I am Joe Lex, retired Temple University emergency medicine professor and your host. Each month on All Bones Considered, I cover a specific topic and release segments as individual episodes. On the 15th of the month, Biographical Bites from Bala usually focuses on one person from Laurel Hill West, but I have certainly been known to break that template many, many times, and will do so again in November. This is November 2025 episode of All Bones Considered, which I am recording during the waning days of October, finishing touches on November 1st. It will tell you of 4 Laurel Hill residents who became treasured members of the legendary 1st City Troop. All of them have memorable oil paintings. 3 of them are on display at the City Armory on 23rd Street. After the full podcast today, each man's story will be released as an individual recording. We're going to start with a general history of the 1st City Troop. That'll take probably about 40-45 minutes. Then the name Fairman Rogers may be best remembered today for a classic painting by Thomas Eakins, but he served as captain of the troop with many years' service. Archibald Loudon Snowden was a 19th century polymath who, in addition to serving the troop, served as postmaster for the city, ambassador to Spain, and in many other positions. And you have heard some of his descendants. I'll explain. Joseph Lapsley Wilson was an able trooper, but is better remembered for his work in horticulture and the magnificent arboretum he started that was later purchased by Albert C. Barnes. And Hugh Craig Jr., affectionately known as Huey, as treasurer and quartermaster, was responsible for their magnificent castle on 23rd Street. Saddle up, let's get started. 1st City Troop, the first 150 years. For nearly 100 years, inhabitants of the property owned by William Penn and his descendants had been arguing among themselves about who would take up arms to defend the land, should such actions become necessary. This impasse ended on March 17, 1777, when the legislators of the newly proclaimed Commonwealth of Pennsylvania enacted a law that compelled all men between the ages of 18 and 53 to enroll in the militia, attend stipulated exercise days, and muster for active duty, or pay a fine for each and every neglect of duty. To enforce this statute, the House installed a lieutenant and 5 sub-lieutenants in each of the 11 counties and the city of Philadelphia. The rise of 72 unheralded men to serve the state as high-ranking civil officials brought an end to a system of patronage that had long been the exclusive domain of the well-born and prosperous. All men enrolled in the militia were obliged to perform 2 months of active duty or find and pay a substitute. However, if any man failed to send a substitute, the law authorized lieutenants to hire one and charge the cost to the delinquent. Well and good, but when the president mobilized thousands of militia in the spring of 1777 to prepare for a threatened British invasion, half of the men called to active duty refused to march and had to be replaced with substitutes. Militia not yet called for active duty eagerly hired out as substitutes, even though this deed did not release them from their obligation to muster when their own class was called up. But, and here is the rub, men who failed to appear for active duty also failed to pay in advance for their stand-ins. As a result, the state was forced to pay the substitutes. The law of supply and demand quickly drove the price of a substitute for 2 months active duty from $20 to $100. Continental Army soldiers drew about $6 a month. Now, when the First Continental Congress had met in September of 1774 in the Hall of Carpenters' Company in Philadelphia, a committee was elected by the citizens of Philadelphia to determine the most effective means to resist the British. This committee's first meeting was the afternoon of Thursday, November 17th, 1774, in the Pennsylvania State House, what we now call Independence Hall. That evening, 3 of the members, together with 25 other gentlemen, gathered back at Carpenter's Hall and allied as the Light Horse of the city of Philadelphia, a name that was later changed to 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry. No one was drafted into the Light Horse, and no one had to pay for a substitute. This was purely a volunteer cavalry troop, the first of its type organized to defend the colonies. In 2025, the troop is certainly the oldest mounted military unit and quite possibly the oldest military unit of any kind that has been in continuous service to the Republic. The organization's founding circumstances and the resilience demonstrated by its original members throughout the American Revolution laid the foundation for enduring values and traditions which have supported its mission for over 250 years, a quarter of a millennium. Light horse units, light horse can be either one word or 2 words, were comprised of soldiers lightly armed on speedy horses. This is as opposed to heavy cavalry. Heavy horse units where the mounted riders and sometimes their horses were heavily armored. Dragoons were considered part of the light cavalry, along with Cossacks, hussars. When into the Valley of Death rode the 600, in 1854's charge of the Light Brigade, the Light Brigade was immortalized almost immediately by Alfred, Lord Tennyson. The gentlemen of the Philadelphia Light Horse were just that, gentlemen. They were professional men, ship owners, importers, traders, generally of conspicuous prominence in the affairs of the day. Some of them even owned other human beings. They were men of means, so the added expense of self-purchased uniforms, weaponry, equestrian gear was not a burden. Many of its original members also held commissions in the Continental Service and in the Army and Navy of the state. Upon admission, each member was assigned a unique number, which has now reached more than 2,500. That's roughly 10 new members per year for the last 250 years. Several social organizations played an important part in forming this new cavalry unit. The oldest of these was the Schuylkill Fishing Company. That was a club founded in 1732 that numbered many troopers among its officers and names familiar to all students of Philadelphia history: Wharton, Bradford, Howell, Biddle, Morris, Mifflin. Other organizations from which the Light Horse drew its members were the Schuylkill Company of Fort St. David's, the St. Andrew's Society of Philadelphia, the Society of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, and the Society of the Sons of St. George. The Gloucester Fox Hunting Club had a notable presence despite its establishment only 8 years prior. The uniform of the trooper of the Revolution, a round black hat with silver cord and buck's tail, along with dark brown short coat lined and faced with white, was similar to the hunting attire worn by club members during hunts. Troop Captain Samuel Morris served as Gloucester's first president, while Troop Captain Robert Wharton was its last. 25 troopers were counted among the club's membership during the Revolutionary War. The associates who met on the evening of November 17, 1774, voted to equip and support themselves at their own expense and to offer their services to the Continental Congress. The company prepared for active duty by holding drills at 5 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon several times a week. Abraham Marcoux, a subject of Denmark, was chosen to be the first captain, primarily because of his previous Danish military experience. Marcoux, that's spelled Markoe, had made his money in sugar plantations, and he owned enslaved people. But he could not openly participate in the war because he was a citizen of Denmark, and the neutrality edict had been issued by then King Christian II of Denmark. However, the captain took an active part in the defeat of the enemy by all other available means. Now, at this time, there was no common flag in use by any of the colonies, and not long after the news of the 1775 Battle of Lexington reached Philadelphia, Captain Marcoux presented the troop with the 13-stripe standard that would be carried in the battles of Trenton, Princeton, Brandywine, and Germantown, and on all parades until about 1830, when it was retired for safekeeping. It is now proudly on display in the Troops Museum, and is thought by many to have been the inspiration for the 13-striped American flag. After George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in June of 1775, he developed close personal contact with the troop as they escorted the general to distant points in the colonies. The command was frequently called upon to provide detachments to accompany prisoners and spies, to bear dispatches for the Committee of Safety, and to march with money for delivery to the Army. Let's look at a couple of battles. Dateline Trenton, December 26, 1776. With Captain Samuel Morris at its head, the Philadelphia Light Horse reported to General Washington in late 1776. The troop covered the rear of the Continental Army as it retreated across the Delaware River, pursued by Lord Cornwallis and his British and Hessian troops. On that legendary Christmas night of 1776, the troop recrossed the Delaware with the Continental Army. The craft in which the troop embarked could not get all the way to the shore, so the cavalrymen were forced to take to the water and wade their way with the horses through the darkness and the floating ice before they got to the shore. And as they approached Trenton at dawn, the troop rode near Washington in the column under Major General Nathaniel Greene. During the Battle of Trenton, the troop served as an escort to General Washington and his staff. A detachment of the troop captured a body of Hessians who had fortified themselves in a barn during a fierce engagement. Now, after the 45-minute battle, the troop took about 1,000 Hessians as prisoners. The Americans lost 2 men. The troop served as the Army's rear guard as it recrossed the Delaware and patrolled the roads until dark. A statue of a trooper serves as the Trenton Battle Monument to this day. Dateline Princeton, January 3, 1777. Trenton was reoccupied on December 30th. The troop performed critical reconnaissance the next day. 12 troopers under Colonel Joseph Reed, Laurel Hill East Section I, that's Esther DeBert Reed's husband. He was the adjutant general. They captured 11 dragoons within sight of the enemy's main army. As Lord Cornwallis occupied the lines across from Trenton, Washington slipped the army out at night and marched on Princeton. Units of Pennsylvania militia, the rear of the Continental Army, were panicked and routed by 50 British dragoons during the night march. The dragoons then encountered 22 troopers aligned abreast blocking the road. After due consideration, the dragoons withdrew, and the troop marched on Princeton. The dragoons were originally a class of mounted infantry or light cavalry. They used horses for mobility, but they dismounted and they fought on foot. From the early 17th century onward, dragoons were increasingly also employed as conventional cavalry and trained for combat with swords and firearms from horseback. Dragoon regiments were established in most European armies during the 17th and 18th centuries, where they provided greater mobility than regular infantry, but were far less expensive than full cavalry. The name dragoon reputedly derives from a type of firearm which was called a dragon. The dragon was the handgun version of a blunderbuss. It was carried by dragoons of the French army. The wide-mouthed barreled gun got its name from the flames that it expelled when the weapon was fired. It made the piece look like a fire-breathing dragon. Thus, the dragon gun was used by the dragoons. 8 days after they crossed the Delaware, General Washington, with many troopers by his side, led the counterattack against the British at Princeton. This is where General Hugh Mercer was wounded and died several days later. He's buried at Laurel Hill East. The troop charged in, quote, the fine fox chase, end quote, and the Army routed 3 British regiments that day. General Washington withdrew the Army to Morristown before Cornwallis could bring up his superior forces. The successful rearguard action by the troops saved the artillery train. The 10 days that changed the world were over. It would be 4 more years until Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, but the Republic would prevail. General Washington relieved the troops on January 23rd, and they returned to Philadelphia. Datelines: Brandywine, September 11th, 1777, Germantown, October 4th, 1777, and Valley Forge. After its return to Philadelphia, the troop engaged in months of arduous service. They served at the Battle of Brandywine and assisted in maintaining communications during the unsuccessful Battle of Germantown. The troop served detachments during the winter at Valley Forge. One group narrowly escaped capture with General Lafayette and his small force when they were nearly surrounded in the woods at Barren Hill. When the British withdrew from Philadelphia, the first troops to re-enter the city were the Philadelphia Light Horse with the city's new commander, the hero of Saratoga, Major General Benedict Arnold. The troop suppressed a serious riot in Philadelphia in October 1779. Troopers subscribed over 1/4 of the 300,000 pounds they had collected to organize a bank in 1780. In January 1781, the troop assisted Generals Lafayette and St. Clair in suppressing a mutiny and administering its amnesty. At the Yorktown surrender, October 19, 1781, the captured standards were placed in the care of the troop. 83 troopers, including Honorary Captain Marcoux, led a parade through the streets of Philadelphia to the State House and surrendered these trophies to Congress. At the cessation of hostilities on April 11, 1783, the troop enrollment was up to 88 members. Following Washington's death on December 14, 1799, the troop participated in the funeral pageant and paraded dismounted, assembling, quote, in complete uniforms at the State House for the purpose of paying the sad tribute of veneration to the remains of their late commander-in-chief, end quote. March 30th, 1811, legislation was enacted to establish a regimental organization for the cavalry. Existing units were permitted to retain their respective uniforms, which had been finalized under the direction of the Marquis de Lafayette. Officers from various city and county Philadelphia units accepted the terms of this law, and Troop Captain Robert Wharton was appointed colonel of the regiment's consolidated troops. Wharton also was elected mayor of Philadelphia 16 times between 1798 and 1824, so he stayed busy. Now, the differences that continued to exist after the War of Independence were not ironed out. This resulted in a declaration of war by Congress on June 18, 1812. 4 days later, the regiment of cavalry offered its services to the government. And during 1812 and 1813, the troop drilled several times a month. It was on August 25, 1814, that news came of the Battle of Bladensburg and the capture of the city of Washington. Bladensburg was the only battle in which a sitting president, James Monroe, rode into battle, although he did not lead troops. Washington led troops once when he was president, but this is a case where Madison just rode out to fight on his own. Despite this gesture, this defeat led to the invasion of Washington, D.C., and the burning of the White House, the most destroyed that it has ever been until this week, as I dictate this. A requisition was made on Pennsylvania for 14,000 men. The troop, under Captain Charles Ross, tendered its services on August 27th and was ordered to act as sentinels in front of the pickets on the line between the Delaware River and the Chesapeake Bay. Their job was to protect Philadelphia from the expected advance of the British troops north from Washington. September 11th, 8 ships were seen heading for Baltimore, and on September 13th, the firing of heavy guns was reported. The enemy was repulsed on September 15th. That day, the troop received an order from the Committee of Defense in Philadelphia to establish an extra line of scouts to Baltimore to bring intelligence of the movements of the enemy's ships in the bay. Former Brigadier General Robert Wharton, who had been captain of the troop from 1803 to 1811, was serving once again with the troop for the campaign as a private trooper. He'd been captain for 8 years, and now he was back as a private. And he was mayor of Philadelphia, and he was taking his scheduled turn as one of the troop's cooks when news reached him on October 16th that he was being called back to the city to serve for a 4th time as the mayor of Philadelphia. By December 7th, 1814, the threat to the city of Philadelphia had passed. The camp at Mount Bull was struck, and on December 12th, the troop was discharged from service in the campaign. By the time on November 17, 1824, that the troop celebrated its 50th anniversary with a dinner at the Franklin House, the troop had seen much action both in the defense of the colonies against foreign threats and recurrent duty to suppress civilian unrest and insurrection. It had become increasingly clear that the organization would carry on in the less spectacular times of peace as well. In civilian and public life, the membership carried on the traditions begun by the troop's founders. Bylaws and uniform regulations were adopted and closely attended to. The claim of the troop that it take the right of the line in all parades was legally established in the Militia Act of April 2, 1821. Efforts were made to record the organization's early history, and the Donaldson narrative was prepared. Original documents were filed for preservation in the archives. In the autumn of 1826, the copper plate that is still used today to print membership certificates was engraved by Cephas A. Childs and first put into use. The anniversary of George Washington's birthday had long been defined as the day we celebrate, and the Sunday nearest the anniversary of Washington's death had become the occasion of an annual church service. The dinner celebrations were held in rented halls, since the troop possessed no permanent facilities at this time, and the services were traditionally held at St. Peter's on Pine Street, that's 3rd and Pine, or Christ Church on 2nd Street, up at 2nd and Market. These were both places where founding troopers had often worshipped with General Washington during and after winning of the nation's independence. St. Peter's had actually opened in 1761 to take the overflow from Christ Church. It remains the home church for the 1st City Troop, and they still attend services there on the Sunday before any deployment. The 15 years under Captain William H. Hart, Laurel Hill East Section 9, 1827 to 1842, times of peace. They were to see these ceremonies mellow into traditions which are still upheld today, while at the same time, the pattern of the organization's military duties became even more clearly defined. The Republic of Mexico declared war against the United States on June 4, 1845, but the hostilities didn't start until the following spring, when a proclamation of a state of war was issued by President Polk. Although there was no call for cavalry, Captain John Butler raised a volunteer company of dragoons in Philadelphia for the regular United States service that served in the Mexican campaign, and several individual members of the troops served with distinction during that campaign, even though the troops themselves were not called up. 1853, they established an armory. The troop rented and furnished a front room on the 3rd floor of a building at 8th and Chestnut. Prior to this, building meetings had been held in the captain's quarters or in rooms hired in various hotels and taverns. Some were held in the Saddle, a number at the Castle on the grounds of the State and Schuylkill. It was not until 1863 that the troop built its first permanent armory at 21st and Ludlow Street. Ludlow was then called Ash. Now, the drift of political affairs in 1861 made it evident that the troop might be called into active service. And when the call for volunteers was made by the federal government on April 15, 1861, the troop at once stepped forward. As a unit, 1st City Troop was the only volunteer cavalry organization accepted under President Lincoln's first 90-day call-up of state militia units. Ultimately, 1st City Troop played an integral part in the Civil War, both as a Pennsylvania militia unit and by the actions of individual 1st City Troopers who served with other units. The impact of their involvement was deep and far-reaching. In accordance with their time-honored custom, the troop attended divine service at St. Peter's Church on the Sunday preceding departure for active duty, and on May 13, 1861, the troop was mustered into service for 90 days. Each man was equipped at his own expense with the uniform of the United States Dragoons. The War Department agreed to supply arms, horse furniture, and camp equipage, but horses and many other necessities were unavailable from Washington. To meet these needs, more than $4,000 was contributed by members and friends of the unit. The unit left on May 30th to join the 2nd U.S. Cavalry at Carlisle, and by June 7th it had reached Williamsport on the Potomac. The troop led the main body across the river to Falling Water, Virginia. On reconnaissance the following day, the troop encountered a small body of mounted Confederates who retreated without offering resistance. After a day of uneventful maneuvering, the troop was again near Falling Water when skirmishers on the front and right flank became engaged with the enemy. The forces of the Confederacy on that field were infantry commanded by Colonel Thomas Stonewall Jackson and cavalry commanded by Colonel J.E.B. Stuart. On the Union side, the 1st Wisconsin, 11th Pennsylvania Rangers, McMullen's Rangers, Perkins Battery, and the 1st City Troop were brought to bear. As the battle was joined, the troop was hurried to the top of a hill in support of one section of Perkins Battery. There they opened brisk fire against the enemy. Although the encounter was brief and losses not heavy on either side, it was the first engagement of the Civil War in which troops had been used in any numbers in a systematic manner. Colonel J.J. Abercrombie, the brigade commander, wrote, "Captain Hudson's 2nd Light Battery and the City Troop under Captain Thomas C. James aided materially in driving the enemy from the field." That was Thomas Chalkley James. Following this first battle, the troops saw duty at Bunker Hill, Charlestown, Harper's Ferry, Keys Ferry, Sandy Hook, Maryland, as well as keeping pickets on the south side of the Potomac. Upon the expiration of its 3-month service, the organization was ordered home. It was complimented in letters by its commanding general and colonel, George H. Thomas, who commanded the brigade, as well as by General Robert Patterson, Laurel Hill East, Section K. In retrospect, as a school for cavalry officers, the Battle of Falling Water was invaluable. As the war increased in scope and ferocity, many additional cavalry units would be formed for federal service. Ultimately, 49 members of the active roll of April 15, 1861, as well as 8 members of the honorary and non-active rolls, would serve as officers in these new federal units. After their federal service was completed, the troop returned to Philadelphia and mustered out on August 17, 1861, but many of them immediately volunteered to join the Union Army. Concurrently, the troop recruited new members to fill the vacancies of those who were marching off to battle in federal ranks. The troop, as a unit, would continue its traditions and its service to the Commonwealth throughout the war. In early May of 1862, the troop offered its services to protect the city of Washington, which again appeared to be in peril. Before the troop's offer could be accepted, however, the Confederate forces fell back. The subsequent disastrous campaign of the Virginia Peninsula caused alarm in the North, and the troop met daily to recruit and to train new members. In September, when the Confederate Army had crossed the Potomac and encamped at Frederick, the troop planned to organize a cavalry regiment which would be officered by its current members. A large storeroom was rented as a recruiting station, and 500 men were promptly enlisted. The project had to be abandoned, however, because at this stage of the war, horses and other requisite equipment were unavailable from the state and difficult to procure in such numbers on the civilian economy. April 4th, 1863, the governor of Pennsylvania signed the Act of Incorporation of the 1st Troop Philadelphia Cavalry, which had previously been approved by the state legislation. June 15, 1863, following the advance of the Confederate Army into the Cumberland Valley, President Lincoln called out 50,000 militia. At this stage, most members of 1st Philadelphia City Cavalry were serving with other federal units or had already become casualties of the war. The 31 remaining members, organized under Cornet Samuel J. Randall, Laurel Hill East, Section 14, who was later Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. These 31 remaining members furnished themselves with horses and equipment and rode for Harrisburg and arrived on June 19th. They were immediately accepted into service without swearing in and ordered to Gettysburg at 4 a.m. on the 21st of June. The troop was the first military unit to arrive on the scene of what was about to become the pivotal battle of the Civil War. The residents of Gettysburg, relieved to see Union soldiers, were extremely generous to the troop then and throughout the campaign. And given the paucity of the troop's commissary supplies, this generosity was greatly appreciated and long remembered. At Gettysburg, Cornet Randall reported to Major Granville O. Haller, in that no one was certain where General Lee and his vast force might be, Cornet Randall was immediately ordered to take a detail of 10 men to reconnoiter the Chambersburg Turnpike towards Cashtown. And there they captured 2 Confederate soldiers who were sent to the rear under the escort of 3 troopers. The reconnaissance established the presence of Jenkins' brigade of Stewart's Cavalry Corps, operating between Williamsport and Chambersburg, which was military intelligence of significant import at this preliminary stage of the battle. Now, the same afternoon, in response to rumors of a force approaching Fairfield, the remainder of the troop was ordered out to reconnoiter, accompanied by Major Haller and Captain Bell, with an additional squad of cavalry which had arrived. Just east of Fairfield, they observed about 160 Confederate mounted infantry scouting the countryside for forage and remounts. The main Confederate body was stationed on the outskirts of the town, while detachments were sent out in various directions. Major Haller left Captain Bell and his cavalry squad in place and cautiously led the 1st City Troopers to within a half-mile of the town. From that point, he ordered a charge that swept through the town and drove the enemy back to a nearby mountain pass. For the next few days, the troop was employed on patrols covering roads leading in the direction of the enemy. Split into 3 detachments on June 25th, the troop continued to live in the saddle, observing and reporting on the enemy's movements. Shots were frequently exchanged on these missions as troopers swung close to enemy formations or galloped in even closer in quest of prisoners needed for intelligence purposes. In one instance, operating together on a mission to York, the entire troop was nearly enveloped and nearly escaped capture by riding long and hard. The troop reached York so covered with mud and grime as to be unrecognizable as either Union or Confederate. And remember, York is only a few miles north of the Confederate lines in Maryland. From York, the troop moved to Wrightsville, and from there across the Susquehanna to Columbia, where it spent the night. The next day it recrossed to observe the enemy advancing in force under General John B. Gordon. A formation of recently raised militia infantry operating in that area was engaged by Gordon's force, and many of the Union militia were quickly enveloped and captured by the battle-hardened Confederate regulars. The troops' efforts were essential in preserving order among the many others who were near panic, particularly as the last of these companies approached the bridge over the Susquehanna, with Gordon's infantry hot on their heels. The military authorities on the scene determined to destroy the bridge, which, with its 21 spans across the Susquehanna, was more than a mile long. 4 troopers, detailed under the supervision of Major Knox of the 9th New York City Cavalry, set to work setting fire to the bridge at sundown on June 28th. And this heroic task took place under the guns of the Confederate soldiers. And when the Confederates drove the troopers from the bridge and attempted to extinguish the flames, it was too late. The bridge was fully engulfed, and by midnight, destruction was complete. General Gordon, writing years later, stated that the destruction of that single bridge at that moment in the battle eliminated any possibility of a march on Philadelphia. A scouting party of 21 men crossed the Susquehanna on July 2nd in flatboats and proceeded toward York. Betrayed by an informer, the unit was forced to break off its march and take up defensive positions in a cemetery near Heidelberg. The men slept with sentries posted at the extremities of a short crossroads, their horses tethered nearby, saddled and ready. In the early evening, there was a thunder of hooves heard on the main road from Harrisburg to Gettysburg and on a parallel road that branches off from York Springs and runs to Hunterstown. About 6,000 of Jeb Stuart's cavalry were observed traversing those roads far into the night. During their passage, they completely surrounded the cemetery, but they never discovered the squad. They had no idea that the 1st City Troop was holed up in the cemetery. Sergeant Robert E. Randall, Samuel's brother, also buried at Laurel Hill East in Section 6, hovered with this small command on the outskirts of the ensuing battle at Rummel Farm, and actually took a number of stragglers and captured 60 horses. The detachment joined the troop on July 6th, after the major battle near Harrisburg. July 15th, the entire troop was ordered to Philadelphia, where a riot was threatened that opposed the draft newly ordered by President Lincoln. The troop was discharged on July 31st after remaining on duty during the draft. Although the troop did not participate directly in any major battle during the Civil War, historical records indicate the actions of the 1st City Troop and Bell's Cavalry, that's Company B of the 21st Volunteers, informed Union forces about the location and plans of Confederate units, which assisted Union General George Meade in positioning his troops ahead of an important engagement. Additionally, historians note that cavalry skirmishes involving the troop in the eastern gorges slowed the Confederate movement across South Mountain. These forces encountered the advancing Confederate troops to such an extent that Confederate leaders believed they were facing experienced security units from the Army of the Potomac. This contributed to allowing Federal troops more time to arrive in the Gettysburg area, with timing that potentially influenced the direction of the campaign. 1st City Troop received the prestigious honor of escorting President Lincoln in June of 1864 on his visit to Philadelphia. But less than a year later, an assassin's bullet compelled the grief-stricken troopers to don their uniforms for the president again, this time as escort and honor guard for the funeral procession of the slain commander-in-chief. Many 1st City Troopers performed admirably throughout the war in Federal service, providing outstanding examples of sacrifice and duty. Captain Thomas Chalkley James, Laurel Hill East Section 10, commander of 1st City Troop during the first 90-day call-up, later commanded the 9th Pennsylvania Cavalry Regiment and was considered to be among the best of the Union cavalry commanders. Chalkley's monument has been defaced. It's in the south section of Laurel Hill East, and the saber that was on it disappeared many, many years ago, unfortunately. Lieutenant Richard Butler Price, another 1st City Troop officer, recruited the 2nd Pennsylvania Cavalry and became their lieutenant colonel. And much of the officer corps of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, the Lancers, was comprised of 1st City Troopers. The men of 1st City Troop acquitted themselves with honor, skill, and courage throughout the Civil War and provided the country a shining example of the role of the citizen soldier during one of the darkest periods in United States history. At the October meeting of the troop in 1865, Generals Grant, Meade, Sheridan, Thomas, Torbert, and Crawford, as well as Admirals Farragut and Porter, were elected to the honorary roll of the 1st City Philadelphia City Cavalry. Generals Meade and Torbert were present as guests of the troop at the anniversary dinner on November 17th, along with Generals Patterson and Cadwalader. 1867, the Militia Act of 1864 was amended, and this secured for the troop its original vested rights, privileges, and immunities. During these years, the unit was reorganized with the strong backing of Generals Patterson, Meade, and Cadwalader, and Civil War veterans returning to the ranks of the troop. The troop started the new century in a new armory. November 17th, 1900, the cornerstone of a new armory was laid. The troop occupied their new home on April 29th, 1901, by hosting a Troop Night celebration. The years prior to the World War were spent much as the pre-Spanish-American years, with training and ceremony. 3 items marked this period. The troop answered the call of the governor and served in Lucerne County during the 1902 coal strikes. They escorted several presidents during this period, and in 1904 they conducted ceremonies for Governor Pennypacker at the St. Louis Exposition. The period of the second decade of this century saw the troop fully involved in the national military training movement known as preparedness, as well as continuing to observe their traditional customs and escorts of notables. In 1916, the troop voted to expand the size of the active roll at the suggestion of Captain James Franklin McFadden. Later in 1916, the troop, along with the rest of the National Guard, was nationalized and posted to Fort Bliss on the Mexico-Texas border. The 142nd anniversary of the troop was celebrated at the Hotel Paso del Norte, while Washington's church service was commemorated at St. James Episcopal Church in Philadelphia and at St. Clement's in El Paso. The troop returned from the border in time to celebrate George Washington's birthday at home with friends and family in Philadelphia. The international situation continued to deteriorate, and the 28th Division was reorganized, but without provisions for cavalry. Several troopers attended military training schools in order to qualify as officers, and the troop itself was redesignated as a trench mortar battle. The troop was deployed to Europe and saw action in the Argonne Forest as well as other locations. When they returned from Europe, they continued to observe the traditional customs and escort duties, and were reassigned to the traditional row of cavalry in 1920. Now, currently, the troop is made up of about 150 members. Most are from the Philadelphia area, although there are international members now. The troop is commanded by a colonel and consists of 4 companies: A Troop, light cavalry; B Troop, mounted infantry; C Troop, armored reconnaissance; and D Troop, mounted support. The troop is also supported by a full-time staff and a number of volunteers. Their armory is in Center City. It is located at 23rd, just south of Market. The first time I visited, the instructions that I was given were get off the Vine Street Expressway at 23rd and head south. It's the first castle on the right. And if you visit, and it's at a time when you've been invited to visit, the indoor parking will be available. They'll open that door, which is a huge display floor. They actually have mounted practice there. They have horse cavalry practice on that floor. Dozens of First City Troop members are interred at Laurel Hill. Current members stay very active in the maintenance of former members' grave sites. The 4 First City Troopers that I want to talk about today flourished in the last half of the 19th century. They were born in the narrow window between 1833 and 1851, and they each died in the first quarter of the new century. Each of them is remembered above and beyond the time they dedicated to the troop. Fairman Rogers was perhaps the most skilled horseman in the city when he was painted by Thomas Eakins in 1879. Archibald Loudon Snowden is better remembered today for his work as an ambassador and as Fairmount Park commissioner, and for his great-great-grandchildren, including Loudon Wainwright III and Rufus Wainwright and other Wainwrights. Joseph Lapsley Wilson was a celebrated horticulturalist who handed over his gardens to Dr. Albert Barnes when he sold his estate in Marion. And Hugh Craig Jr. became the face of the troop for many years as their secretary and quartermaster. Troops still celebrate him with Huey's breakfast when they return from a deployment. Let's get started. Fairman Rogers, 1833-1900, horseman extraordinaire. The first part of this sketch is mostly by Fairman's brother-in-law, Horace Howard Furness, who had it privately printed in Philadelphia in 1903. The second part will be from a 1965 article in the Philadelphia Museum of Art Quarterly Bulletin. Fairman Rogers was born in Philadelphia on the 15th of November, 1833, and died in Vienna on the 22nd of August, 1900. Within this span of 67 years, there is comprised a life of unusual fullness, but how brief for the large circle of his friends. He was the only son of Evan Rogers, a retired iron merchant of wealth, and of Caroline Augusta, a daughter of Gideon Fairman, the inventor of what is known, I think, as engine turning in the engraving of banknotes. To this invention is due the elaborate and artistic designs at this day on our national paper currency, whereof we are justly proud. In addition to this aptitude for mechanics, Gideon Fairman possessed unusual intellectual and social charms. To the end of his life, he was an intimate friend of Washington Irving. I have heard my father say that Washington Irving, on one occasion, declared that were he condemned to a lifelong imprisonment with the privilege of choosing the society of but one friend, his choice as a companion would be Gideon Fairman. It's worthwhile to recall these characteristics of the grandfather. They appear emphasized, if possible, in the grandson. By the way, the author, Horace Howard Furness, the father he refers to is the Reverend William Henry Furness, who was pastor of the First Unitarian Church on Chestnut Street for more than 50 years. Okay, back to furnaces. Note here. Fairman Rogers' father sprung from sturdy Pennsylvania stock, which claims descent from John Rogers, the martyr. He was an unyielding disciplinarian, and while indulging his son in whatever wealth can give, inculcated those principles of moral restraint, exactitude in method, and precision in details, which were afterwards so marked a feature in the son's career. Through the boy's mother, a woman of rare personal beauty, was transmitted with no loss in the transmission, a heritage from Gideon Fairman of a serenity of temper which none of the vexations of life could ever ruffle. Under such influences, the young lad grew up, disclosing from his earliest years a bent for mechanical devices, and was admired, caressed, and loved by all who knew him. He was fond of writing, of dancing, of swimming, of skating. His abbreviated customary name, Fair, led itself readily in his childhood to the endearing and equally appropriate Fairy. Competent as he was in many directions, he was most apt in physics and mechanics. Even while yet a schoolboy, before he was admitted to college, he gave, at the request of his school teacher, a lecture to his schoolmates on the electric telegraph, illustrated by means of wires attached to the walls and ceiling of the schoolroom. The exact date of this truly precocious performance I do not know, but inasmuch as he entered college in 1849, it must have been in his 14th or 15th year, that is, 1847 or 1848. An early date, I fancy, for anyone not professional. Still more for so young a lad to have been this familiar with the subject in its infant days. He entered the University of Pennsylvania in his 16th year. His 17th year began in the following November. After passing his entrance examination, he sojourned during the summer with his family at Bethlehem in this state. Here, in a family also sojourning in the quaint old Moravian town, he met his fate in Miss Rebecca H. Gilpin. From this boy love at first sight, he never after for an instant swerved, but remained the enamored, loyal lover through boyhood, manhood, and through age. After their marriage in January 1856, 44 full years of mutual devotion hallowed a union whereof the world affords only too few examples. In the university, his career was creditable from the start to the close. While not taking the highest rank, he was always among the best. For Latin and Greek, he cared little, but to the mathematics and physics he devoted all his zeal. A friendship here between the young collegian and Professor John F. Fraser, and continued with ever-increasing closeness as years advanced, exerted an abiding and beneficial influence on the character of the younger man. After he was graduated in 1853, young Rogers traveled for many months in England and on the continent, where his route was mainly determined by his eagerness to examine the most famous works of modern engineering skill. After his return, probably in 1855, another warm and enduring friendship enriched his life and was destined largely to control it. He became acquainted, possibly at the table of Professor Fraser, with Professor Alexander Dallas Bache, the superintendent of the United States Coastal Survey, who was evidently at once attracted to the quick-witted, well-equipped, sunny-tempered young man, and eventually accepted his services as a volunteer aide in the government work then on hand in the measurement of a baseline in Florida. Now, here was practice in the field, such as any engineer double young Rogers' age would have been glad to gain. Under an officer of the highest authority in the land in civil engineering, the most rigid and punctilious of military disciplinarians went on duty, the genial, warm-hearted friend, and within the limits of becoming mirth, the most jovial of companions in hours of relaxation. Sterile indeed must be the soil which would not respond to such influences. In young Rogers' case, the soil was ready to teem with flower and fruit. The hardest of hard work ruled the day, and in the evening, on board the government boat in the lagoons of Florida, "Sir," said Dr. Johnson, "we've had a good talk." Throughout his life, Rogers delighted to recall the various charms of this and other similar expeditions under the command of Professor Bache. After the return from his wedding tour in Europe, he was busily occupied until the breaking out of the rebellion in 1861 in giving a series after series of lectures on physics and its branches at the Franklin Institute and on civil engineering at the University of Pennsylvania, where he had been installed in the chair of that department. Later, in 1861, he delivered a lecture on roads before the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And still later, in 1863, he held for a year the appointment of lecturer in Harvard College. All these lectures were marked by complete mastery of the subject, by thorough minuteness of detail, coupled with clearness of exposition, and a quiet, refined manner of delivery, utterly devoid of pedantry or pretense. In 1857, he was elected a member of the American Philosophical Society, the youngest man, it was so stated at that time, he was only 24 years of age, on whom this honor had been conferred. In the summer of the same year, he accompanied Professor Bache to Maine, again as a volunteer aide, for the purpose of measuring the Epping baseline near Cherryfield in that state. The outbreak of the rebellion found Professor Rogers a member of the first troop of the Philadelphia City Cavalry, a time-honored and aristocratic militia organization dating from the days of the Revolution, of which our city has been always justly proud by reason of its admirable drilling and its handsome uniform. Throughout the long, still years of peace, its duties had consisted in the ornamental yet needful office of acting on state occasions as escort to the governor of the state or to the President of the United States. But now this profound repose was broken by a call to arms. Although probably not a young man had joined the city troop in days gone by with any thought that he should ever have to put his saber to warlike use, yet now, so near to grandeur is our dust, so close to God is man. When duty whispers low, "Thou must," the youth replies, "I can," and not a stripling, but sprang to the saddle. In the hurried preparation for actual service, I well remember hearing what requisitions were made on Fairman Rogers' forethought. He was but a private in the ranks then, and on his ingenuity in all questions of detail, however minute. He spent a whole evening showing over and over again to almost every member in turn with smiling patience the most expeditious and convenient way of packing the kit and the most economical of space. When in camp, Rogers was promoted to orderly sergeant, and several years later, when the captain died, Fairman Rogers was elected to that vacancy. After having been mustered out of service at the end of the 3 months for which the troop had been called into the field, Professor Rogers at once returned to his lectures before the Franklin Institute and to his classes at the university. Again, he lectured in Washington before the Smithsonian Institution, this time on glaciers. In the meantime, he was again on Professor Bache's staff, engaged in completing the survey of the Potomac. The autumn saw him again in service in the field as a volunteer engineer officer on the staff of General Reynolds. And in the following summer of 1863, he was serving in the same capacity on the staff of General William F. Baldy Smith. Wherever and whenever he believed he could be of service to his country or his fellow men, his time, his labor, his talents were freely given. In 1863, the National Academy of Sciences was organized. Fairman Rogers was one of the original 50 members elected by the United States Senate. As a member of this academy, remember, this is the National Academy of Sciences. This is not the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. This is the National Academy of Sciences. As a member of this academy, he was requested by the government to correct the compasses of iron vessels, which for this purpose and for his convenience were dispatched to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Now, this task in a novel department required of him extraordinary skill and was of the utmost responsibility. The experience and the exhaustive study which it involved found expression in a few years later in A Treatise on Terrestrial Magnetism and on the Magnetism of Iron Vessels, published by Van Nostrand in 1877. A revised edition was published in 1883. At one time, the treatise was used as a textbook in the Naval Academy at Annapolis. With such zeal as his in whatever his hand found to do, united with so much efficiency, executive ability, and prepossessing manners, it is small wonder that many an institution was eager to obtain his services on its executive board. After having faithfully performed the duties of Professor of Civil Engineering in the University of Pennsylvania for 15 years, he resigned that position in 1871 and was immediately elected to the Board of Trustees. 9 years later, when through the resignation of Dr. Stille, the office of Provost became vacant, Professor Rogers, the honorable title still clung to him, was earnestly and unanimously requested by the Board of Trustees to accept this position, but he shrank from the weight of this responsibility and the restricted liberty of action which its acceptance would entail, and he declined the honor to become the provost of the University of Pennsylvania. At about the same time that he resigned his professorship at the university, he was elected as one of the directors of the Academy of the Fine Arts. Herein he found a field extremely congenial to his tastes. The artistic blood of his grandfather was always stirring in him. What admirable fruit his zeal and enthusiasm bore, let the following minute tell, which was adopted by the Board of Directors after the tidings of his death in Vienna reached this country. Mr. Rogers was elected a member of the board in 1871, and for 12 years served the interests of the institution with rare intelligence and devotion. At the time of his election, the Academy was preparing to give up its old habitation on Chestnut Street, and Mr. Rogers became chair of the committee in charge of the present building. In its internal design and arrangement, much that is admired and best is owing to his careful and earnest thought. Not only that, Frank Furness was the architect. Upon completion of the work in 1876, the year of the nation's centennial anniversary, he became chairman of the Committee on Instruction. Now, the period was an important era in art education in the United States. Under Mr. Rogers, the school system of the Academy was wholly reorganized upon a basis so thorough that the schools rose to the highest point reached in this country, and for the first time women were admitted to them upon the same conditions as men. Their preeminent condition today for the study of the fundamental principles of art and their character for sincere and earnest work are in large measure due to Mr. Rogers' influence. In 1883, he relinquished all active duties and withdrew from the Board of Direction, but the record of his benefactions and services must always be a part of the history of the Academy. Another debt which we owe to Fairman Rogers is that he was one of the founders of the Union League, which was itself an offspring of the Saturday Club, whereof also he was one of the original promoters. The indebtedness of our city in times past to the Saturday Club is noteworthy. Composed as it was of men of influence and wealth, it fairly represented the working force of the city and gave to this force a unity which neither New York nor Boston possessed. On one occasion, to give an instance of what I mean, at one of these Saturday Club evenings, the unhappy case was mentioned of one of our most eminent scientific men of national and international reputation, not a resident of our city, who was about to retire from his position at the head of a well-known institution in Washington, enforced thereto by age and infirmity, yet with no provision for his family. The assertion was accepted by a group of men, in which Fairman Rogers was prominent, that such a termination of a most honorable career would be a national disgrace. Whereupon, in a few minutes, the sum of $60,000 was promised, and the amount was collected and sent as a tribute of deep respect within 2 or 3 days. $60,000 in the 1850s is essentially $1 million. No, 1880s. So it's less than $1 million, but not that much less than $1 million. From his early years, Professor Rogers had been a collector of books. Naturally, he preferred those in his own chosen department of civil engineering. Down to 1878, this collection had become about as complete as it was possible to make it, and he then presented it to the library of the university as a filial and enduring memorial of his father. In another and favorite department, he had also gathered a noteworthy collection, namely on horsemanship. This collection is possibly unparalleled in this country and probably could not be duplicated. It, too, he subsequently gave to the university library. Professor Rogers was one of the early photographers, and some of his pictures, taken 45 years ago, show very careful manipulation and will even stand a lenient comparison with those of the present day. Remember, he's writing this in 1903. According to a recent communication in The Writer and Driver, it is due to his ingenious application of the principle of a zoetrope that Mr. Muybridge was enabled to show from his own photographs animals in motion. From this device of Professor Rogers, so says the writer, have followed the biograph, the cinematograph, and all similar adaptations. One of the first typewriters, if not the very first, was set up by its inventor in Professor Rogers' library. At that time, I remember hearing of improvements which were suggested and adopted, and the gratitude of the inventor. Of everything pertaining to riding, driving, and hunting, Professor Rogers was unfeignedly fond. He had ridden in England with the Pytchley and the Corn Hunt. He'd been a member of the North Warwickshire. Here at home, he was one of the founders of the Rose Tree Hunting Club near Media. Together with the late Judge Cadwallader and John D. Blight, Esquire, he was the first in this country to test Boucher's methods and the writing of the haute école. He was also the first, I think, in this city, at least within recent years, to own and drive a 4-in-hand coach. Now, a 4-in-hand coach is very simply any carriage or coach that is pulled by 4 horses. Thus it was that this many-sided man touched life at such diverse points, and his solid worth dignified them all. The hand that could delicately adjust the compass on an iron ship lost none of our respect when it deftly caught a whiplash in a double thong. The care and responsibility of so many interests where others were involved could not fail as the years ran on to make themselves felt to one as conscientious in the performance of every duty as was Professor Rogers. Accordingly, from time to time, he resigned from one and another of the many institutions whereof he was a director, and finally decided to give up his steam yacht and even his House Beautiful at Newport, where, as was his wont in everything he undertook, he had brought the art of ribbon gardening to such perfection that the wonder and admiration of his neighbors in even that flowery kingdom were excited. An honestly earned and indefinite rest in Europe seemed now to be his as of right. But a mind as active as his could not lie idle. Work of some kind was essential to it as air to the lungs. And thus it happened that what had been hitherto an altogether delightful and healthful recreation now became a source of earnest and profitable study. The well-kept roads in England and on the continent, the fair landscapes, the wayside inns, the summers longer and gentler than here at home, all combined to rekindle his love of horses and of driving. And if of driving, then of driving in its highest perfection, that of a 4-in-hand. Before his imagination there floated the ideal of a book which should hold to coaching the same relation that a scientific treatise holds to its subject. It must be thorough, exact, exhaustive. The realization of such an ideal, Professor Rogers, in the maturity of his powers, now resolved to attempt. The result was, in 1899, given to the public in A Manual of Coaching, a work which it would be difficult to praise too highly. By maintaining no standard lower than perfection in the humblest details of coach, of harness, of driving, it elevates what is perhaps supposed to be merely the pastime of luxurious ease into the dignity of an art worthy of respect. A turret or a splitter bar may be an insignificant thing, but perfection is not. And in this manual, nothing is overlooked. From the position of a screw to the mathematical formula for computing the centrifugal force in turning a heavy coach around a sharp corner. In no case does the more excellent way fail to receive due note. Even to those who can mount the box and handle the reins only in imagination, the book is good reading. Here and there beams forth the twinkle of a laughter-loving eye, such as, if a man has not hands enough to spare one to take off his hat to bow to a lady, he should continue to practice driving until he can find one. And again, there is something so exhilarating in the motion behind 4 horses through the fresh air that even stupid people wake up and for once make themselves agreeable. Again, the humorous description of an unhappy beginner's first experience in the box, when the reins seem to be all edges, speaks home to the heart of every driver. Again, there are sentences of epigrammatic wisdom, such as, "It is usually better to keep out of a fix than to get out." It is sad satisfaction to know that the author lived long enough to be assured that his manual was warmly admired and extolled by those best qualified to judge, and gratefully accepted at home and abroad as a standard authority. The end came swiftly in Vienna. The footsteps of death were inaudible and noiseless. An organic ailment, long suspected but never obtrusive, culminated after about a week's illness, and he now rests beside his father and mother in Laurel Hill Cemetery. A choicer spirit has seldom visited this earth. To a keen intellect were united clearness of exposition and a retentive memory. Warm, loyal in his friendship, he never cherished an ill feeling, for no one ever did him an unkindness. On many an institution in his native city, an ineffaceable impression has been left of his judicious devotion, of unstinted hospitality, and the most considerate and attentive of hosts, of such exquisite urbanity that, though emphatic and inflexible in his matured convictions, he was never known to give offense in expressing them, of high veracity and a delicate sense of honor, and of such imperturbable serenity that it may be said with absolute truth that a harsh or hasty word never fell from his lips. Possibly it may be thought by those who did not know him face to face that in what has just been said there is too much of the personal equation. Be it so. We were children together, boys together, men together, brothers in love and in law. I can say but what I believe. Before her who is left within a shadow which will never lift, we can but stand in silence. And that is signed Horace Howard Furness. That was published privately in 1903. And then I found another article from the spring 1965 Philadelphia Museum of Art Bulletin. This is entitled A May Morning in the Park. It is written by famed motion picture and art historian Gordon Hendricks. So much of what follows is from that scholarly article. Shakespearean scholar Horace Howard Furness had married Fairman Rogers' sister Kate in 1860, and the brothers-in-law became fast friends. It is entirely possible that from a 21st century perspective, Fairman Rogers is best known as the subject of one of Thomas Eakins' masterpieces in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Fairman Rogers' Four in Hand, also known as A May Morning in the Park. This relatively small but masterful painting, it's roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, was completed by Eakins in 1879-1880. It is widely recognized as a landmark in American art for its extraordinary realism, technical innovation, and its reflection of the scientific and social currents of its era. Now, Eakins had recently been hired by Rogers. Remember, Rogers was president of PAFA. At the same time, he commissioned Eakins to do a portrait of him as he handled his 4-horse team on a whirl through Fairmount Park. Now, Eakins, if you'll remember, actually this wasn't a podcast. This was a lecture that I put on YouTube a couple of years ago about people painted by Thomas Eakins who were buried at Laurel Hill East and Laurel Hill West. I think there were 30 or 31 of them, something like that. But I talked about the work that Eakins did with Muybridge and his trying to freeze motion with his cameras. So let's get back to this. Eakins had recently started to partner with experimental photographer Edward Muybridge, if you remember, had used several cameras in a row to capture the movements of a trotting, cantering, and galloping horse to distinguish which hooves were on the ground with each of those gaits. Now, using Muybridge's photographic studies, Eakins was the first known artist to capture the precise movement of a team of 4 horses pulling a carriage. The level of accuracy and dynamism was unprecedented. It set new standards for the depiction of movement in art and influenced both American and European artists. The painting is significant as a representation of urban leisure and modernity in late 19th century Philadelphia. Rogers' fashionable attire, advanced carriage design, and the inclusion of notable figures highlight the painting's function as both a social record and an artistic achievement. Eakins' use of scientific methods to achieve accurate anatomical and mechanical detail marked a pivotal shift in American painting. Instead of relying on convention or artistic license, he used direct observation and photographic references, demonstrating a commitment to truth in art. This approach anticipated modernist tendencies and helped establish Eakins as a leading figure in the realist movement. The location of the painting was just north of Memorial Hall. The painting shows Mr. and Mrs. Rogers with 4 passengers on a bench behind them and 2 grooms at the rear of the coach. The passengers, Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Dick and Mr. and Mrs. George Gilpin, Mrs. Rogers' brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Rogers paid Eakins $500 for the painting. The painting was donated to the Philadelphia Museum of Art by the Dick family in 1930. Eakins prepared for this work with a series of glass transparencies of horses in motion, which he then shared with his class. Remember that Eakins was teaching the 3 illustrators at this time. The Red Rose girls were in his classes at about this time. This is a class that was famous in art circles throughout the United States for its basic research in anatomy. It was a class that was horrifying Philadelphia by cutting up formaldehyde-drenched cadavers within the elegant walls of the Academy of the Fine Arts. Also, Eakins insisted that the cadavers be anatomically intact. Before Eakins took over, PAFA had the habit of castrating the male cadavers before women art students could examine them. Eakins also led his students to local bone-boiling plants to witness and perform in those odoriferous establishments dissection of dead animals. It is a measure of Rogers' imagination and loyalty that, as chairman of the Academy's Committee on Instruction, he supported these bizarre methods just as he supported the inclusion of the gross clinic in the dispute with the Society of American Artists. It is possible, one may wistfully conjecture, that 7 years later, when Eakins was asked to resign from the Academy, he might have stayed had Rogers not resigned 3 years before that. The Eakins anatomy class was also said to have visited Rogers' stock farm, but the author found no evidence that Rogers had a farm. even though there was a claim made in Scribner's Monthly, September 1879. He apparently kept his horses in stables adjacent to the Great House on Rittenhouse Square. The author of this article warns us that the historian must not make the mistake of assuming that because Rogers chose Eakins to paint a picture of his four-in-hand in motion, that Rogers was a perceptive critic of art. The contrary, unfortunately, appears to be true. The list of paintings sold at auction when Rogers was breaking up housekeeping in Philadelphia shows him a considerably better judge of horseflesh than of art. And a list of his loans to the Metropolitan Museum for a May to October 1884 show contains scarcely a name that is not irretrievably dated. Nor does either list contain a May morning in the park or the Fairman Rogers four-in-hand, as it is now generally called. Rogers apparently liked the work too well to sell it, and the Metropolitan not well enough to borrow it. Fairman Rogers was one of those men privileged to enjoy wealth without the necessity of gathering it. His father was a wealthy iron merchant who gave his son a fine townhouse on wedding day and left him a considerable fortune to do with as he pleased. What Rogers pleased to do with the fortune made him the very model of a civilized bon vivant. Never did his wealth weigh him down. He used it for his own pleasure and for his family and friends, although his wife came to him apparently laden with even more coin of the realm than he had from the Gilpin family. He'd also played a very active part in the social life of Philadelphia by right of birth, inheritance, and marriage, even though his house at 202 Rittenhouse Square was a short distance off the social essence of Walnut Street, but still it was Rittenhouse Square. Rogers was also an intellectual of standing. Professor of Civil Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania, lecturer on mechanics at the Franklin Institute, a founder of the National Academy of Sciences, author of several significant technical works. He was a founding director of the Academy of Music. He was a trustee of the University of Pennsylvania, and when the provost resigned in 1880, he was asked to fill that office as a combination university president, dean, and provost. He was morally and financially instrumental in helping to bring into being the Academy of the Fine Arts' great Ruskinian Victorian building at Broad and Cherry Streets, and continued also both morally and financially to elevate its standards. A letter of 1878 sets his feet on the rock of racial equality at a time when such a position was conceivably not quite the most popular one he could have held. He said, "I do not think that we should make any distinction in the classes of the Academy on account of color, and I should be in favor of admitting the applicant of whom you speak if he is otherwise qualified. My own opinion is that the time is past for such distinctions to be recognized." Rogers was a founder and enthusiastic member of the famous Coaching Club, along with such famous names as Belmont, Havemeyer, Vanderbilt, Whitney. It's claimed that he was the first in Philadelphia to drive a four-in-hand. 6 years before the Eakins Commission, he had had a coach built by Barker and Company of London, and its glittering red and black are a striking element of the painting. This coach is illustrated in Rogers' 1899 manual, a work that deserves to be called definitive. It is still the Bible of coaching. Now remember, this was written in 1965. Eakins altered many of the coach's details, as Rogers probably expected him to. How else, for example, could all the people that Rogers or his wife wanted on top of the coach have been seen if they'd not been carefully arranged between each other on a single long seat? As a photographer himself, Rogers had reason to be interested in Muybridge's photographs. He had been for some years an enthusiastic amateur photographer in a day when amateur photographers led many professionals in the quality and skill of their product. 7 years before Muybridge began his work in Palo Alto, Rogers was hoping to photograph his horses in motion and had built an ingenious novel shutter for that purpose. At the April meeting of the Philadelphia Photographic Society, according to the Philadelphia photographer, June 1871, A form of shutter was exhibited, designed by Professor Fairman Rogers and constructed for him by Mr. Joseph Zentmeyer of Philadelphia. So far as I know to the contrary, this idea as applied to a shutter for a photographic lens is a novelty and deserves some notice. The principle is a very simple one, similar to that of a Venetian shutter. Professor Rogers, after some consideration, selected this form of shutter for the purpose of photographing horses when in rapid motion, and is so far pleased with it. Although Eakins frequently saw and sketched Rogers on the box of his four-in-hand, he must have sketched the relatives from life elsewhere or from photographs. Eakins is said to have had the coach and four driven past him again and again. He had the 6 Muybridge series of horses in movement, and it was thus possible for the first known time in the history of art to create a correct picture of animals in motion. And during the course of his work, he even made models of the 4 in wax. He then had to decide between making the horses look as if they were in motion, according to the tastes of the time, and making them look as he knew from the Muybridge photographs they actually were. He also had to decide the same matter about the wheels of the coach. Now, as for the first problem, the course was clear. Why bother at all, asked this most honest of painters and his patron, to use another rocking horse position when it was not life? They wanted to show horses as they were, not as they were supposed to be. So, with single curious exception, the 4 in hand are painted to correspond with the Muybridge series. The exception is the near wheeler, who is not in a trot or a canter or a gallop, but is walking. Why is this horse walking when there's no time during the movement of a 4 in hand that a horse walks while the other 3 trot? We don't know why he drew it this way. All trotting horses support themselves when they are being supported on their diagonals. And this is true of both lead horses and the off-wheeler of a May morning in the park. But it is not true of the near-wheeler. That horse is supporting himself on his far laterals, an impossible position for a trotter. Eakins had to decide to do what he thought would be the least confusing. That was just to blur the whole wheel. To expect the public to believe in a wheel with only the lower spokes clear-cut was, he decided, expecting too much. And although the truth of Eakins' painting is one of its most significant characteristics and one which sets him above most others, he decided he would not show the truth here. He may have painted the spokes as Muybridge's photographs showed them to be, defined at the bottom and blurred at the top, and then changed them at Rogers' suggestion, which might coincide with what the Evening Telegraph reporter saw. A May morning in the park no longer lacks the approval that it failed to arouse in 1880. Along with the Gross Clinic, the William Rush series, and some of the skull pictures and more formal portraits, it ranks as one of Eakins' most engaging and important works. In focus in The Coach of a Philadelphian is the essence of the photography versus art controversy. Is the truth art? A May morning in the park is, for the historian, a meeting point for decision concerning this last holdout of realistic painters. This was their exclusive ability to depict motion, an ability that had not been theirs to have and to hold until the systematic work of Edouard Muybridge. It may have been a turning point in the work of Thomas Eakins, and therefore in the history of American art. The subject again was Fairman Rogers 4 in hand, 1833 to 1900, buried at Laurel Hill East. All right, let me tell you what's coming up at the cemeteries. Either that or take a bathroom break right now. If you are listening as it comes out, there is a fall foliage tour on Sunday at Laurel Hill West at 1 p.m. I highly recommend that you be there. That's after attending the famous Army, Navy, and Marine veterans of Laurel Hill East on Sunday morning from 10 a.m. until noon. Saturday, November 8th, Hotspots, Storied Plots, 10 a.m. until 11:30. That is an introductory tour to the cemetery. We'll learn about some of the more famous people. Guinevere Eckert-Meese will be the host for that, whose great ancestor, I don't know how many great-great-grandfathers or great-uncles ago, Meese invented tomato ketchup and is buried at Laurel Hill. But she won't tell you that. Let's see, there's a tiny tour for Taft's on Sunday, November 9th from 1 p.m. to 2:30, and I'll bet you that's Guinevere also. There's a members-only tour Sunday, November 9th from 10 until noon. Fateful Departures, When Death Comes in Twos. That is Sarah Hamill. You need to become a member just so you can go on this tour. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. She tells the stories of shipwrecks and decapitations and just horrid stories of people who die as pairs. It's a great it's a great tour. I highly recommend that one. I recommend all of the tours, but there are some that I recommend more than others. I will admit that. And then Monday, November 10th, our annual U.S. Marine Corps observance, except this year it is the 250th. We gather down at the final resting place of the Corps' first General Commandant, Jacobs Island. And Marines always show up in their dress uniform, which are just incredibly handsome to see, these uniforms on the cemetery grounds. Keep that in mind. Monday, November 10th, for Marine Corps 250th birthday. There's Death Cafe, Wednesday, November 12th from 6 p.m. till 7 p.m. That's virtual. If you go to laurelhillphl.com/events/calendar, you'll find more about that. Sacred Spaces on Thursday, November 13th, and that is Sarah also. A Pocket of Paradise neighborhood tour, Saturday, November 15th from 1 p.m. to 3. And then Peter Howell is doing his Call in the Cavalry, the first city troop tour. So if you want to go on a tour and meet Fairman Rogers and A. Loudon Snowden and Huey Craig, you can do so on November 16th at 10 a.m. Peter will take you around and introduce you to all of these troopers. There is another members-only tour on Sunday the 16th from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's called Mosaics and Mausoleum. And this is Rachel Wolgamuth and Sarah on a members-only walking tour in select mausolea to see mosaics. Oh, that's going to be so good. Like I say, if you're not a member, that's how you get this. These are free tours, but you've got to be a member. You've got to be a member. Now this looks interesting. Starter Guide to Conducting Oral History with Elders. That is scheduled for Tuesday, November 18th. It's a 1-hour online presentation. Let's see. Give the attendees the tools they need to conduct oral history interviews with their loved ones. So you do not have to be local for this. This is a Zoom presentation. It is dirt cheap. It's $5, and if you can't afford $5, just get in touch with us. Programs at laurelhillphl.com, and you get added to the list. But this is an opportunity to learn how to start doing your own oral histories with your elders. And since I'm an elder now, I should probably pay attention to that. Sacred Spaces and Storied Places on November 22nd, 10 a.m. until 11:30. That would be me for the Saturday tour. And if you like, I can keep that one a limited mobility tour. I can easily do that tour, never leaving the paved path. But if you don't have any limitations, we go all over the place. We go over the river. Well, there's no river, and there's no woods for that matter. So we don't go over the river and through the woods. We go out across the cemetery grounds. That is Saturday, November 22nd, 10 a.m. to 11:30. That's when I give a tour. And the next day, I give another tour. This is a favorite, though. This is a walk around the Summit section. This is from 1 until 3 p.m. Summit is the area right behind the conservatory. And it just attracted a group of people that I really have enjoyed researching. We've got everybody in there from the drinker family, where I could easily spend 45 minutes just talking about the drinkers, to a guy who managed the St. Louis Browns for a few games, to an admiral in World War II, a naval admiral who is in an unmarked grave, to a deaf-mute Episcopalian saint. No, I'm not making this up. To the guy who wrote O Little Town of Bethlehem. No, he wrote Away in a Manger. He wrote Away in a Manger. All of these people, plus Strawbridge and Clothier. I'll talk about them. Anyway, that's going to be Sunday, November 23rd, 1 o'clock, Laurel Hill West, when I give a tour of the Summit section. There's a Hotspots tour at Laurel Hill East on Black Friday. That's got to be Tom and Patty's then. You bet. Tom and Patty, traditionally, they give the Black Friday tour, the general tour at Laurel Hill East, 10 a.m. Friday, November 28th. In their own words, Saturday the 29th, 1 p.m. at Laurel Hill East. That's Rich Wilhelm. And he's going to talk about people's diaries and letters and novels and poetry that he will read at the gravesite of these people to tell more about the history of the United States and the city. I think it's a fascinating tour. Rich has done a lot of research on this one, and I highly recommend it. And it'll be a busy weekend for you, because you know who's back on Sunday, November 30th? From 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. at Laurel Hill East, we have Bill Barker. Bill Barker spent 27 years as Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. He spent 27 years at Colonial Williamsburg, and now he is Jefferson at Monticello. There are maybe 2 people in the world who know more about Thomas Jefferson than Bill Barker does, and he comes every year, and he does this Thomas Jefferson's Friends and Foes tour, which is just so good and so full of information that I cannot recommend it enough. I really think that's when it's going to be a busy weekend for you. If you start on Black Friday and then you go to the tour on Saturday and then come to the tour on Sunday, but it'll be worth your time. It really will. There are some tremendous tours coming up. Let's see if there's anything on the first day or 2 of December I should mention. Nah, that can wait. December 4th, so I'll have time to do that. Okay, so that's what's coming up at Laurel Hill. Don't forget, the book is out, All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women. You can purchase it online. You can purchase it at the bookshop. You can purchase it from the gift shop, online, anyway, or you can just get in touch with me. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. Archibald Loudon Snowden, 1835-1912. The man who did everything. I wonder what went through the mind of the man, I'm sure it was a man, who had to write the headline for an obituary of Archibald Loudon Snowden in 1912. Let's see, do I talk about his years when he was captain of the 1st City Troop? But how about the time he spent as chief coiner for the United States Mint? Maybe I should emphasize his years as director of the Fairmount Park Commission, but I can't ignore the years he spent as our minister to Greece and Romania and Serbia and his time in Spain. And, looking back, in retrospect, from the 21st century, it might be tempting to lead with his great-grandson, longtime Life magazine correspondent Loudon Wainwright Jr., or his great-great-grandson, singer-songwriter Loudon Wainwright III, think Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road, or even his great-great-great-grandchildren, Rufus, Martha, Lucy. The key, I guess, is to tackle his life chronologically. Archibald Loudon Snowden was born in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, August 11, 1835. He was the son of Marjorie Bynes Loudon and Isaac Wayne Snowden. His father had been a surgeon in the U.S. Army, served in the First Seminole War under General Jackson. He was wounded at Fort Scott. He died when Loudon was 13. His grandfather had fought in the War of 1812 and his great-grandfather in the Revolution. His uncle, James Ross Snowden, was a politician and director of the United States Mint. Snowden attended secondary schools near Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and then he taught for a while, district school, at the age of 15, before he attended Jefferson College, where he received a bachelor's degree in 1856. He studied law after graduation, but he never entered the bar. He was later awarded honorary Doctor of Law by the college, though. In 1857, at the urging of his uncle, he joined the service of the United States Mint in Philadelphia, where his uncle was superintendent. He rose through the ranks to become chief coiner. Politically, he was initially a Democrat, but he switched to the Republican Party in 1860. And he was often mentioned as a dark horse candidate for governor, but he never ran, and he was never nominated. At the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, Snowden organized, clothed, and fed a full regiment, which he served as lieutenant colonel. And when the regiment entered the Union Army, they were divided among several other Pennsylvania regiments, and Snowden was not elected as one of their officers, so he returned to the Mint. From the Mint, he had a reputation. He, as an authority on all things relating to coins and coinage, and under his superintendence, the whole mechanical appliances were brought up to the highest point of efficiency. It was in 1877 that he was elected captain of the 1st City Troop, which he had joined years earlier. On February 25, 1878, the Philadelphia Times ran a story on page 2. After the inspection and drill of the 1st City Troop on Washington's birthday, a banquet was given at the Armory on 23rd Street. When the health of the commander, Captain A. Loudon Snowden, was drunk, he took occasion in response to announce his determination of severing his connection with the troop at an early date. Captain Snowden says he will tender his resignation just as soon as final settlement is effected with the state. The troop, he states, is now in fine condition, being fully equipped in every particular for the active field service of 75 men. My reasons for leaving the troop are simply these. Nearly 16 years ago, I entered the command and have risen through all the grades by election to the captaincy, and know with the onerous duties of the post office, besides my own private business, I do not feel that I can give the time that is necessary for the welfare of the command. From 1877 to 1879, he served as postmaster of Philadelphia, and he was promoted to second superintendent of the Mint, where he served from 1879 to 1885. He was credited with inventing several new pieces of Mint equipment. He exclaimed truthfully, "I have the best equipped Mint in the world." In 1885, after a service at the Mint extending more than 28 years, he handed in his resignation to President Cleveland. In 1887, he served a marshal in the centennial celebration of the U.S. Constitution. That same year, he was named United States Minister Resident to Greece, Romania, and Serbia. He served successfully and gratefully advanced North America's interest in these countries, while negotiating trade deals with Greece and improving the American Archaeological School in Athens. He also stopped the unlawful use of U.S. trademarks in Serbia and negotiated an extradition treaty with Romania. By the time he left this position, he had advanced to envoy extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary. In July 1892, there was a vacancy for the ambassadorship to Spain, and Snowden was assigned the task just in time for the Columbian Exposition. He served well enough that when he stepped down, he was awarded the Grand Cordon, or Cross of Isabella the Catholic, by the Queen Regent of Spain for his role in solving grave diplomatic questions. This is one of 3 Spanish knighthoods that are used to award extraordinary service to the Kingdom of Spain by a non-citizen. This order was created in 1715 by King Ferdinand VII. The other knighthoods are the Orders of Charles III, established in 1771, and the Order of Civil Merit, established a century ago in 1926. There are more than a dozen other Grand Crosses awarded by Spain, but just to citizens. And there are half a dozen that have been abandoned through the years that are no longer awarded. Snowden was also awarded the Grand Cordon of the Savior by King George of Greece, and the Budapest government conferred on him the Grand Cordon of the Crown of Romania. In 1889, he served as a marshal in the centennial celebration of the U.S. Constitution. The Fairmount Park Commission was established in 1867 to protect the city's drinking water from industrial pollutants along the Schuylkill River, and it began to acquire land adjacent to the river. As a result of the Park Commission's considerable, albeit ostensibly nonpartisan authority, appointment to the commission was highly desirable. Although officially appointed to 5-year terms, many of the commissioners actually served for life. A lot of familiar names served on the Fairmount Park Commission. Publisher Morton McMichael, military commander George Gordon Meade, both buried at Laurel Hill East, attorney and art collector extraordinaire John J. Johnson, investment banker Edward Stotesbury, radio personality Mary Mason, attorney Robert N.C. Nix III. Multiple generations of the Price and Widener families served on the Fairmount Park Commission, including Eli Kirk Price, a founding commissioner, and his grandson, Eli Kirk Price, Jr. Industrialist P.A.B. Widener served on the commission from 1889 to his death. His great-grandson, Fitz Eugene Dixon, 1923 to 2006, was president of the commission from 1983 to 2002. But it was in 1883 that Snowden gave the dedicatory talk at the dedication of the Silent Sentry statue at Mount Moriah Cemetery. In 1884, Archibald Loudon Snowden had been named as one of the first commissioners of Fairmount Park, and in 1902 he was elected as president of the board. Recall, the Wissahickon Creek provided water power to mills for many years. Many rough mill roads once ran through the Wissahickon Valley. But as traffic increased, people needed a better road. In early 1850s, work began on a turnpike to ease travel between the mills and the city. And in 1869, the turnpike became part of Fairmount Park. It was called Upper Wissahickon Drive. It was free to all who came to enjoy the valley's beauty. But automobiles were starting to show up, and this caused debate. Do we want automobiles in this park? Should this be a quiet park trail or a busy road? And in 1899, with Snowden's backing, the Park Commission banned automobiles along the drive. For the next 30 years, it received proposals to reopen the drive. By this time, Archibald Snowden had died. The commission voted against them all, and this stretch of road, it's about 6 miles long, has been called Forbidden Drive ever since. And no cars are allowed, thanks to Snowden and his committee. After Snowden left public service, he became deeply involved in the insurance industry, and he served as president of both the United Fire Underwriters of America and the Fire Association of Philadelphia. Beginning in the 1750s, some American insurance companies issued metal fire marks to policyholders to signify that their property was insured against fire damage. The fire marks bore the name and or symbol of the insurer, and some included the customer's policy number. The mark for United Fire showed a fire hydrant. The mark for the Fire Association of Philadelphia showed a hydrant with a hose snaking away from it. The company or agent would then affix this mark to the policyholder's home or business. For owners, the mark served as proof of insurance and a deterrent against arson. For insurance companies, the mark served as a form of advertising and alerted volunteer firefighters that the property was insured. The Fire Association had been founded in 1817 by a group of 11 volunteer engine companies and 5 volunteer hose companies. It stayed in business until 1958, when it merged with the Reliance Insurance Company of Philadelphia. Now, naturally, Archibald was a clubman. American Philosophical Society, Sons of the Revolution, Union League, Philadelphia League, Grand Lodge of the Masonic Order, and so on and so on. In 1900, he gave an invited talk to a Republican Party gathering in New Jersey. The Inquirer reported, during the hour and 20 minutes that he spoke, he touched on every issue of this campaign, paramount and false. He argued in earnest the tariff question, spoke plainly and to the point of the free trade conditions of Europe, as he had personally observed them, and of the happy, prosperous conditions of the working men of this rich country, the best educated, the best fed, the best clothed, the best housed, the happiest, most contented working people on the face of God's earth, surrounded not only by the necessities of life, but many of the luxuries of happiness. He shattered the fallacy of free silver. No man who heard him in his masterful presentation of the financial question who is not convinced of the soundness of the principles of the Republican Party upon the financial question. The most delicate points that he made were eagerly followed and grasped by the intelligence of his hearers, and not one failed to show their appreciation. 1902, Snowden found himself as president of the Electric Company of America. On December 4th, 1903, the Philadelphia Inquirer said that suit has been entered against Colonel A. Loudon Snowden, president of the Fairmount Park Commission, Charles A. Porter, former state senator, C. Kennedy Crossan, a contractor, and the estate of Ludwig S. Filbert, who died about 2 months ago. They are accused of having made illegal profits through the promotion of the Danville-Bessemer Company, which was dissolved yesterday. The suit is brought to recover about $325,000, but the case is shrouded in mystery. The bill in equity has been impounded, and the identity of the complainants is not known. An effort was made yesterday by some of the stockholders to prevent the dissolution of the company, and about 20,000 shares of stock were voted against the proposition. Nearly all of this stock was owned by residents of Lancaster County. I could not determine the results of this case. This was a major case brought against Snowden and others, and the results never made the newspapers, at least not the ones that I have access to. Loudon Snowden died in 1912 at his home at 1812 Spruce Street. He was interred in the bridge section at Laurel Hill East in Millionaire's Row under a Scipio-like sarcophagus. He's remembered by the First City Troop with a life-size oil painting in their dining room. In 2014, that statue of the silent sentry at Mount Moriah had gone on a journey and out of public view for 40 years. It had traveled initially to a smelter in Camden, New Jersey, who refused to melt the statue down and kept it. Laurel Hill East obtained the statue. It now stands guard over the General Meade Post plot of Civil War veterans. Now that Mount Moriah is rising from the dead, they may want it back one of these days. When Laurel Hill dedicated this statue, a Loudon Snowden Wainwright grandson gave the dedicatory talk. I do not know if his great-great-grandson Loudon Wainwright III or any of his great-great-great-grandchildren have visited the grave. If they want to stop by where they're touring in the area, I'll be happy to give them a tour. There's another branch of the Snowden family. They're over at Laurel Hill West. They have a mausoleum. I call it Everglade Point. It's Everglade, but it feels like it's more Franconia because it's right across the street from the Pew Mausoleum. Years after he died in 1918, this Snowden's widow, Pearl Pinkerton, had a large mansion built on a great bluff at the southern top of Rhode Island. Their son, Robert Burns Snowden, inherited the mansion from his mother, but he was killed in a car crash while he was leaving the house in 1941. He, too, is buried in the mausoleum. In 1948, this Rhode Island property was sold to Standard Oil heir and second-largest shareholder Stanley Harkness for $80,000. His wife Rebecca made no friends with her neighbors when she adopted habits like cleaning her swimming pool with champagne or starting her own ballet company and then hiring almost all of the dancers away from the Joffrey Ballet. Well, after this house, mansion, whatever you want to call it, exchanged hands a few more times and underwent a name change. It had been Holiday House, and then it was called High Watch. It was purchased in 2013 by a popular Pennsylvania-born entertainer named Taylor Swift for $17.75 million. Swift's 2020 studio album, Folklore, features The Last Great American Dynasty, a song about the house and the life of Rebecca Harkness. If you're a Swiftie, you already knew that. Joseph Lapsley Wilson, 1844-1928, the trooper as horticulturalist. I'm sure by now that you've heard the story of Albert Barnes. No, he was not a member of the 1st City Troop. Born in a working-class Philadelphia neighborhood in 1872, Albert Barnes received a B.S. degree from Central High School in Philadelphia, and at the age of 20, his M.D. from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. He also studied chemistry and pharmacology at the University of Berlin and at the Ruprecht Karls Universität in Heidelberg, where he befriended German scientist Hermann Hille. Back in America, Hille and Barnes developed a new antiseptic silver compound, Argirol, and formed the firm of Barnes and Hille in 1902. Some metals are known to be antibacterial. Silver, copper 2, zinc 2 can bind to bacterial cell membranes and rupture them, or increase their permeability, which leads to leakage of essential cell contents and cell death. And while these silver salts do not generally penetrate skin, they're well absorbed through open wounds and mucous membranes. Silver in a cream excipient has been used in wound dressings, coatings for medical devices, and water purification systems for decades. Copper is commonly found in hospital surfaces, door handles, and plumbing systems to reduce microbial contamination. Zinc can be incorporated in ointments and creams for skin infections. Brass is often used in public fixtures such as railings and doorknobs for its combined antibacterial effects from copper and zinc. From 1900 to the beginning of the modern antibiotic era, around 1940, with the introduction of sulfa drugs, silver was one of the many mainstays of medical practice in Europe and America. Various forms of silver were used to treat literally hundreds of ailments: lung infections such as pneumonia, tuberculosis, and pleurisy, sexual diseases, gonorrhea, syphilis, skin conditions, leg ulcers, pustular eczema, impetigo, boils, acute meningitis, infectious diseases, erysipelas, cystitis, typhus, typhoid fever, tonsillitis, and eye disorders, dacrocystitis, corneal ulcers, and conjunctivitis and blepharitis. In 1939, Hill and Pillsbury listed 94 different proprietary silver preparations in use up to that time. However, with the coming of antibiotics, the so-called miracle drugs, silver rapidly fell into disuse and was replaced first by sulfa drugs and then penicillin after World War II, and since then by hundreds of specialized antibiotics. The use of Barnes medicine became the standard of care in newborns. In 1907, Barnes bought out his partner, and in 1908 he established the A.C. Barnes Company in Philadelphia. The success of this endeavor provided him with a sizable fortune. Barnes's extensive personal studies in psychology, philosophy, and art, particularly his reading of John Dewey, George Santayana, and William James, led him to form his own theories about art and education. Combining his educational concepts and his compassion for the working man with his burgeoning interest in the arts, Barnes initiated educational seminars and hung paintings by William Glackens, Ernest Lawson, and Maurice Prendergast in his Argirol factory to be studied and discussed by his workers. His first formal classes in art appreciation were held at the factory for the benefit of his employees. Barnes represented a new force had entered the art world, a self-made man with substantial financial and intellectual resources, combative intensity, relentless curiosity, a keen eye for art, and a deeply rooted respect for the common man. The Barnes Foundation was established by Albert C. Barnes in 1922 to, quote, promote the advancement of education and the appreciation of the fine arts, end quote. It was locally initiated in a 12-acre arboretum in Marion Station and recently relocated to the Arts District near the Rodin Museum. The foundation is home to one of the world's largest collections of Impressionist, Post-Impressionist, and early modern paintings, with extensive holdings by Picasso, Matisse, Cézanne, Renoir, Modigliani, as well as important examples of African sculpture. All told, this Barnes collection includes more than 4,000 objects. Among them are 900 paintings, and their estimated value is $25 billion. Dr. Albert Barnes is not interred at Laurel Hill, although he was cremated at Laurel Hill West. His ashes were scattered on the Barnes Foundation campus after his 1951 death in a car crash. As the setting for his foundation, Barnes and his wife Laura had purchased the 12-acre arboretum in Marion near Philadelphia that was owned by lawyer, Civil War veteran, horticulturalist, and 1st City Troop member Joseph Lapsley Wilson. After Barnes' purchase, Wilson stayed on the property and served as director of the Arboretum and as a foundation trustee until his death in 1928. How did Wilson, a railroad man, start an Arboretum? Joseph Lapsley Wilson, 1844-1928, played a significant and sustained role in the railroad industry during the latter half of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Wilson was born in Philadelphia on September 17, 1844, a great-grandson of Dr. John Carson, 1752-1794, one of the incorporators and original fellows of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia. Wilson attended Westchester Academy, which later became Westchester University, for 5 years, but he was unable to attend a planned college course due to the outbreak of the Civil War. In 1862, Wilson entered the military. He became a member of C Company Gray Reserves, which served the Union Army in Maryland and Pennsylvania. By the time Wilson was discharged in 1867, he had risen to the rank of sergeant. Wilson joined the Little Schuylkill Navigation Railroad and Coal Company in 1865 as secretary, shortly after the Civil War. The company was a division of the Reading Railroad, primarily responsible for transporting anthracite coal from northeastern Pennsylvania's coal regions, a critical resource fueling industrial expansion in the United States. Wilson worked there for 38 years, providing continuity and administrative expertise that facilitated the company's operations and long-term strategic management. As secretary, Wilson oversaw logistics, communications, contracts, and coordination between mine operators, railroad management, and clientele. During his tenure, railroads underwent significant technological and operational transformations, including improvements in locomotives, expanding track networks, and more structured corporate administration, areas where experienced executives like Wilson were essential. The anthracite railroads were vital in the post-Civil War American industrial economy. They linked coal-rich northeastern Pennsylvania to markets. Long-serving administrators like Wilson were instrumental in professionalizing railroad operations and ensuring the reliability and profitability of critical mineral transport. Wilson enlisted in the Union Army in 1862 as a member of C Company Gray Reserves. During the Gettysburg Campaign, he participated in that action in Carlisle, where he saw combat against Confederate forces. Following the Civil War, Wilson continued his military involvement, and in 1867 he joined the 1st City Troop City Cavalry. Wilson served in the troop for several decades and was elected captain of the unit from 1889 to 1894, during which he commanded and supervised training and operations. It was during this period that he also contributed to the unit's history. He authored its centennial history in 1875 and then updated it in 1915 as the Book of the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, 1774-1914. Both editions are available for free from archives.org. His service in the 1st Troop emphasized leadership, military professionalism, and preservation of cavalry traditions within the National Guard framework. Wilson's military career extended beyond combat. He was a member of the Pennsylvania Commandery of the Military Order of Loyal Legion of the United States, MOLUS, reflecting recognition as a Civil War veteran and leader within military societies. His dedication to both the Union Army and the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry demonstrated a lifelong commitment to military service and civic duty, blending active engagement with organizational leadership and historiography. It was in late 1870s that Wilson purchased the land in Marion, Pennsylvania, where he built a mansion. He named it Red Slates. He was inspired by the rare plant species that he observed at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia and cultivated more than 200 specimens of trees and rare plants on this estate. Many of these species were acquired from international sources, including Asia, expanding the diversity of local flora in the region. Now, both botanical gardens and arboretums are dedicated to the study and enjoyment of plants. They differ in their primary focus, though. A botanical garden typically features a wide variety of plant types, flowers, shrubs, herbs, and trees, often organized by species or regions or thematic displays. In contrast, an arboretum is specifically devoted to the cultivation, study, and display of trees and woody plants. Arboretums emphasize tree conservation, research, and education. Botanical gardens may concentrate more broadly on plant diversity and horticulture. The concept of the arboretum originated in Europe, where estates and botanical gardens included collections of trees for study and enjoyment. The idea was imported to the United States in the 19th century as interest in botany and landscape architecture grew alongside the country's expansion. Early American landscape architects and botanists recognized the value of preserving and studying trees, both native and exotic. The first botanic garden in the United States was in 1728 in Kingsessing, a southern suburb of Philadelphia. It's now part of the city. It was started by a man born in Marple named John Bartram. His Bartram boxes that he shared with other researchers spread North American plant culture around the world. Bartram, who lived from 1699 to 1777, is buried near Derby, and Bartram Garden, of course, is still open. The oldest public arboretum in the United States is the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard University, established in 1872 in Boston. Designed by renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, the Arnold Arboretum set the standard for combining scientific research with public accessibility. It became a model for other institutions, emphasizing the importance of systematic tree collections for education and research. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, arboretums proliferated across the country. Institutions like the Morton Arboretum, founded in 1922 near Chicago, the U.S. National Arboretum, established in Washington, D.C. in 1927. These expanded the scope of arboretums to include ecological research, plant breeding, and conservation of endangered species. Local governments, universities, and private foundations established regional arboretums, each reflecting the unique flora and environmental concerns of their area. Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley are festooned with an abundance of botanical gardens and arboretums, which, in my mind, I can hear Sister Marionette insisting more than 60 years ago that should be arboreta. The behemoth is 1,100 acres. It's the crown jewel insofar as variety and other activities at the Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square. But within the city limits of Philadelphia and on its outskirts lie a handful of botanical gems, somewhere between 20 and 30, depending on who's counting and how far from the city's limits you're willing to count. Remember, Laurel Hill Cemetery is a certified arboretum with a full-time botanist and several state champion trees. You get botanical tours of Laurel Hill from Aaron Greenberg when the seasons change. Now, as I've said before, botany was indeed taught as part of the broader field of natural sciences in 19th century America, along with biology, geology, chemistry, and physics. Educational institutions, including colleges and universities, often group these subjects together under the umbrella of natural philosophy or natural sciences. Many American colleges in the 19th century, such as Harvard, Yale, and the newly established land-grant universities, offered courses in botany as part of their natural sciences departments. These courses were sometimes required for students pursuing degrees in science, medicine, or agriculture. The teaching of botany was often influenced by European scientific traditions, but American educators also developed their own approaches, especially as the country expanded westward and encountered new plant species. Laurel Hill's connections to botanists and horticulturalists are lengthy. We start with the cemetery co-founder, John J. Smith, and the young Scottish immigrant architect, John Notman, who were both accomplished arborists. Brother and sister John and Lydia Morris, Laurel Hill East Section 4, are the namesakes for the massive Morris Arboretum. John Caspar Wister, younger brother of the three remarkable Wister sisters, quietly made his reputation at the Tyler and then the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore. Arthur Hoyt Scott, inventor of the paper towel, is buried on a hillside in the summit section of Laurel Hill West. In William M. Klain Jr.'s 1995 tome, that's Klain, K-L-A-I-N, Gardens of Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley, he divides the chapter into Colonial, Andalusia, Stenton, Pennsylvania Hospital Physic Garden, and the Collector's Garden, Bartram's, Tyler, Scott, Haverford, Morris, and the Garden as Art, Wick, Ebenezer Maxwell Mansion, Chanticleer. There's a full chapter just dedicated to the DuPonts. And I really want to do a podcast about Hagley and Nemours and the DuPonts one of these days. I'll figure out a way to do that. There's a map at the end of this book, Gardens of Philadelphia and Delaware Valley, shows a staggering 43 different places to visit in this area to learn more about plants and gardening. It's pretty overwhelming. I live in Ballackinwood. I'm going to say 100 yards off of City Avenue outside of the city of Philadelphia. I'm near St. Joseph University. Within a 10-minute drive, I can reach public gardens at the zoo, at Fairmount Park, at Haverford College Arboretum, at Bryn Mawr College Arboretum, and the Henry Foundation for Botanical Research. And, of course, Laurel Hill West Cemetery. And I pass the Scott Arboretum every time I visit my periodontist out in Swarthmore. Within 10 minutes of my house is a century-old gem that most people have never heard about, and that is the Arboretum of the Barnes Foundation. Since 2018, it's been known as the Barnes Arboretum at St. Joseph's University. 1922, Dr. Albert Barnes purchased this 12-acre property along City Avenue from former First City Troop member Joseph Lapsley Wilson, who'd been quietly cultivating one of the finest arboreal collections in the area for nearly 4 decades. As I said before, Barnes retained Wilson as his arborist and even built him a small house on the property, while he tore down the old house and erected the Paul Philippe Crête designed mansion that served as the home for Dr. Barnes' invaluable art collection for many decades. And to honor Joseph Lapsley Wilson's contribution, Barnes named the new entrance road that he had built Lapsley Lane. Wilson's approach reflected an early commitment to international collecting, a practice that broadened the scope of American arboretums beyond native species and the English garden traditions. His collection included hardy and decorative varieties that could thrive in Pennsylvania's climate and laid the groundwork for a diverse year-round display of plant life. Wilson's Arboretum demonstrated careful consideration of aesthetic composition and botanical variety. While the precise landscaping plans from Wilson's time are less documented, his planning choices created a balanced and visually appealing environment, which was later preserved and expanded under Laura Barnes and the other horticulturalists that followed. He integrated rare and unusual woody plants throughout the grounds in a way that supported both the beauty of the landscape and its use as a living collection for educational purposes. The design and plant collections that Wilson initiated still serve as a core reference for botany and horticulture students, demonstrating sustainable collection management, the adaptation of exotic species, and integration with public education. Wilson helped cement the model of an arboretum as a living museum. He blended scientific rigor with aesthetic enjoyment. By prioritizing diverse specimens, including rare Asian and North American plants, and by maintaining records of acquisitions and plant locations, he set the standard for curatorial practices that balance research, conservation, and public engagement. His contributions informed later expansions, such as the addition of specialized collections, the ferns, the lilacs, the magnolias, that were added by Laura Barnes. But his original layout ensured that the arboretum remained both beautiful and instructive. Now, what are some of the rarer trees that Wilson acquired and planted? Well, there's the dove tree, Davidia involucrata. There are a couple of these at Laurel Hill West also. They're beautiful when they bloom. They have white bracts that resemble handkerchiefs that hang from the branches, or doves, actually. They have a monkey puzzle tree, Araucaria araucana, a distinctive conifer from the Andes, known for its very unusual spiny branches. Once you've seen a monkey puzzle tree, you won't forget it. They have a Japanese wheel tree, Trocadendron arylioides, a rare East Asian species with unique wheel-like leaf arrangements. Fern-leaf beech, Fagus sylvatica, a European variety of beech notable for its finely cut leaves. There's a redwood, a Sequoia sempervirens, native to Northern California, kind of rare in the mid-Atlantic region. Although there is one at Tyler. Tyler Arboretum has a redwood, if I remember correctly. Additional conifers in this collection: lacebark pine, blue atlas cedar, dawn redwood, all unusual for cultivation in Pennsylvania. And finally, we can partially blame Mr. Wilson for the proliferation of the ginkgo trees, Ginkgo biloba. Wilson contributed to their propagation following earlier collections from John Bartram. The ginkgos have taken over one portion of Laurel Hill West. It's actually called Ginkgo Alley. And when it rains like it's raining today, as I record this, that road is really slippery when you're sliding around on squash ginkgos. Joseph Lapsley Wilson shaped the vision, diversity, and educational mission of the Barnes Foundation Arboretum, integrating global plant collections with careful design principles that influenced arboretum management and design well beyond his lifetime. And like his fellow First City trooper Fairman Rogers, Wilson also managed to be painted by Thomas Eakins. The original, painted in roughly 1895, is on display in the third floor museum at the 23rd Street Armory. In 1983, a sketch for this canvas sold for $9,000 at Christie's. After his 1928 death at age 83, Wilson was buried at Laurel Hill East, Section F, with a simple stone. The arboretum that he started flourishes just yards off City Avenue and across the street from St. Joseph University, with its neighbor Joseph Lapsley Wilson. Hugh Craig Jr., 1851-1913, the glue that held everything together. A few years ago, before the COVID epidemic, I decided to develop a tour at Laurel Hill East for people with limited mobility, wheelchairs, scooters, what have you. No stairs. Everybody stays on a paved path. I still give this tour a couple of times a year. I'm giving one at Laurel Hill West on Saturday, November 22nd, in fact. Mine is also always the last one to step off at the annual Soul Crawl. I wait for stragglers, and anybody who's shown up with limited mobility, I invite them to go with me on that last tour. When I was putting it together, I decided on a lollipop-shaped tour. It starts at the gatehouse, goes past Adrian and Pauly into Central, and then a right turn to the river and a loop in front of Millionaires Row. Now, amid the massive mausoleums, heroic statues, and other monuments, there was a starkly empty plot at what the cemetery map showed was Section K, lots 41 to 43. I could find no visible marker on a piece of prime property on Millionaires Row, which overlooked the Schuylkill. From this plot, you could literally throw a stick and it might land in the plot of General Robert Patterson, Captain Henry Biddle, Robert Carson of Carson Valley School fame, Henry Diston of Diston Saws, Matthias Baldwin of Baldwin Locomotives. They're all buried together in the same area. I probed the ground of this plot with my hiking pole. I found no buried markers. That means I had to work backwards. So I went to the cemetery archives, and I found a thick file. It talked about the Craig family that was buried in that plot. Hugh Craig Sr. was a highly respected grain and flour merchant. Young Wilson Darling Craig died of galloping thesis at 19 while he was a student at University of Pennsylvania. Galloping thesis is severe tuberculosis. There's a dormitory on the quad that's named for him. He's one of several Laurel Hill inhabitants who has a dormitory named for them at the quad. And then there's Hugh Craig Jr., whose portrait hangs in the stairwell at the 23rd Street Armory. He was the man responsible for constructing the 23rd Street Armory. Why was there no marker? Hugh Craig Jr. was born March 11th, 1851 in Philadelphia. He was the son of Hugh and Catherine McCausland Craig. His preparatory education was received at the old Dr. Ferry's School, and afterwards he entered the University of Pennsylvania. In 1871, at age 20, and for the next 42 years of his life, Hugh Craig Jr. was a member in active service of the 1st City Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry. Now, he did go into business with his father. His father was in a grain business, grain and flour, and Hugh did take over that business, but his real love was the troop. Huey, as he was known by his friends, saw his first field duty as a private cavalryman in the Pittsburgh Railroad strike of 1877. That was one of many incidents of strikes, labor unrest, and violence in cities across the United States that year, including several in Pennsylvania. Between July 21st and 22nd in Pittsburgh, which was a major center of the Pennsylvania Railroad, more than 60 people, including women and children, were killed in the riots. Strikers burned down the Union Depot and 38 other buildings at the Pennsylvania Railroad yards. In addition, more than 120 locomotives and more than 1,200 cars were destroyed. And due to track damage, no trains ran for a week following the cessation of violence in 1877. Estimates of losses from those riots estimate from $2 to $5 million. That's equivalent to somewhere between $50 and $150 million today. Pittsburgh was the site of the most violence and physical damage of any city in the country during that great strike. Fresh troops arrived in the city on July 28th, including Hugh and the 1st City Troop. And within 2 days, peace had been restored and the trains resumed, except for the torn-up tracks. In 1881, Huey was elected quartermaster sergeant, and he held this post until after the return of the troop from active duty in the riot campaign in 1892 during the Homestead strike, when they protected the workers who had replaced the striking miners. In other words, they were protecting scabs. When Huey received an appointment as quartermaster on the staff of the captain with the rank of second lieutenant, he duly received his commission in the National Guard of the state. The following year, an inspecting officer submitted a report to the War Department in Washington after he inspected the troops' condition. His report highlighted the command's strength and efficiency, noting that a complete set of equipment, camp and garrison supplies, horse gear, clothing, arms, and accoutrements matching U.S. Army standards was available for a full troop as required by state law and stored in the organization's armory thanks to its quartermaster, Huey Craig. Lieutenant Craig was placed upon the honor roll of the troop in 1894, but he's continued his duties as quartermaster until he died. He gave the most careful and unremitting attention to the advancement of the interests of the organization. He kept himself informed in the many details of a quartermaster's duties, especially in the problems of the laying out of encampments and the transportation of the sustenance of troops. The military authorities of the state frequently availed themselves of his knowledge of those affairs. The armory building of the organization, which was finished and occupied in 1901, stands as a monument to his work. The money required for the purchase of the ground, a frontage of 92 feet on 23rd Street with a depth of 240 feet to 24th Street, and for the erection of the building amounting to $100,000, was financed by him, with the money contributed by the members, and $45,000, the proceeds of the sale of the 1874 armory building on 21st Street. Huey was deeply involved in managing the organization's affairs and equipment. He regularly visited the armory and oversaw operations. He served under 6 captains, and he earned 6 service stripes. In the United States, the concept of a service stripe dates back to 1782, when during the American Revolution, George Washington ordered that enlisted men who had served for 3 years, quote, with bravery, fidelity, and good conduct, end quote, should wear a narrow piece of white cloth of angular form on the left sleeve of the uniform coat. Now, members can carry up to 17 service stripes on their left sleeve, indicating 51 years of active service. This is from an 1898 report about troops' activities during the Spanish-American War. There were many occurrences to make Friday, July 22nd, an eventful day. In the morning, 100 Krag-Jorgensen carbines arrived for the city, and there was an unusually interesting skirmish drill in the afternoon. Krag-Jorgensen Norwegian repeat-action bolt rifles, believe it or not, were the standard trooper armament of the day. That's what the U.S. Army was using back in the late 1890s. Late in the evening came the eagerly awaited orders for the troop to proceed forthwith to Newport News to take transports to Puerto Rico. Needless to say, the camp was at once thrown into a thoroughly happy mood, and dozens of telegrams were sent notifying Philadelphia friends of the good luck of the troop in securing active service, when fully 7,000 regular cavalrymen were fretting in camps of mobilization. Post Quartermaster Hugh Craig Jr. arrived the next day and announced his intention of staying with the troop until it left for the front. The men could not help feeling better when they saw his jolly face in the camp. And then later, from the same report, at nightfall, the city troopers had just put up their small tents and gone into camp for the night when at 8:30 p.m., the signal service sent word to Captain Groom that the tents would have to come up and the men get away quickly, as a river would soon be rolling over the spot where the troopers were preparing to turn in. Indeed, by the time the warning came, trickling streams innumerable were sweeping through the field below the camp. Assembly was sounded, and in 45 minutes, tents were struck, bags packed, horses saddled, 4 wagons loaded, and the troop moved out. When the tents were first pitched, it was the intention of the troopers to name the camp after Hugh Craig Jr., but this idea was given up after the message from the Signal Corps, and the name Mala Agua substituted, wicked water. Mr. Craig's name was afterward bestowed upon the last camp occupied by the troopers on foreign soil. Huey was also known for his discreet philanthropy. He supported every cause that he considered worthwhile. He was actively involved in various charitable organizations, and he held memberships in numerous prominent social clubs in Philadelphia: the Rittenhouse, the Markham, Corinthian Yacht Club, the St. Anthony Club. He was an experienced world traveler and an individual of notable breadth. He earned respect and admiration from his peers. The death of Hugh Craig, Jr. occurred November 6, 1913, at Jefferson Hospital after he'd suffered a fall. At the time he died, he was the oldest man in active service on the troop's roster. He had never married, nor had he ever shown interest in establishing a relationship, a male or female. His funeral services were held at his late residence, 1917 Chestnut Street. 75 members in full dress uniform of the troop and 60 members in citizens' clothes attended. Taps were played by Emeritus Bugler Ellis Pugh, and the burial, which took place in Laurel Hill Cemetery, was with full military honors, including 8 rifles. There's no record that he was buried in his uniform. I would be astounded if that were not the case. He wore that uniform every chance that he had. Now, Huey had been very close to his family, notably in his relationship with his mother, whose picture he carried in his breast pocket, and his sister, Mrs. Henry Reed Hatfield. Her husband was both a doctor and a lawyer. Among other things, Mrs. Hatfield donated to the troop the military library that was assembled by her brother over many years, approximately 1,000 volumes, several of which are considerably rare. For these books, duly cataloged and indexed, Mrs. Hatfield built in the main room of the armory a metal bookcase in 5 sections, bearing at its top a bronze plaque, 1871, Hugh Craig, Jr., 1913. She also gave the troop the life-size portrait of her brother, which hangs on the wall at the head of the main stairway of the armory. Huey's pocket watch is on display in the Armory Museum. He was remembered affectionately by everyone who served with him under any circumstances, and to this day, the 1st City Troops celebrate the end of each deployment with their special Huey's Breakfast, which is named in his honor, a big affair in the armory. In the autumn of 1917, Mrs. Hatfield, as a further tribute to her brother, fitted up the family home on Chestnut Street as a club for enlisted men of the United States Marine Corps to be used as a comfortable home for men on furlough. The house contained dormitory accommodations for 75 men, bowling alley, pool rooms, shuffleboards, skee-ball outfit, and a lounge connected with a ballroom for receptions and entertainments. The club thrived until it was discontinued due to a smaller Marine force at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which made its upkeep unnecessary. There was another club of like character and with the same purposes under the joint management of the United States Army and a group of Philadelphia women who had charge of the canteen service of the American Red Cross in the Pennsylvania-Delaware Division during the war. This was installed in the same headquarters. It was officially known as the 2nd Corps Area Service Club No. 1, and it was open to men on 60 hours furlough from Camp Dix. This is Huey's old house. So what about that big blank burial spot on one of the prime pieces of property at Laurel Hill East? It's on a slight rise. It overlooks the Schuylkill River. The answer was in the files of the cemetery. There's a letter. It's dated 1879. It's written on blue stationery, and it's from neighbors in the cemetery. In other words, relatives of people who were buried around the Craig plot. They had apparently caught whiff that the Craigs were planning to build a large mausoleum on the site. And several prominent people with relatives in those nearby plots objected to the possibility of a mausoleum, quote, obstructing the view, end quote. It would obstruct the view of dead people. So from 1879 to 2024, the Craigs were in unmarked graves. Now, after I dug around, both literally and figuratively, the Craig plot, I shared what I had found with the staff and with other guides. Well, one thing led to another. And over the next year or two, Hugh Craig Jr. and his family had an appropriate marker placed on their gravesite, and then a bigger one, courtesy of the 1st City Troop, many of whom showed up at the graveside ceremony we had November 17th, 2024. And Huey's traditions live on among those who loved him. And believe me, many people loved him. The mid-November episode of Biographical Bites from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories number 50 will be about college basketball at Laurel Hill West. Elwood Rutschman was considered the best basketball referee in the country, and he was highly sought for important games in the Philadelphia area. Lon Jordet coached the Penn team through many years and had more wins than any other Penn basketball coach in the 20th century. In December's All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 81, I would have finished the year by talking about our founders and our architect, the beginnings of the cemetery, the first years of Laurel Hill East before the 1854 consolidation, when it literally was a garden cemetery outside the city limits. So let's go back and look at the beginning. Laurel Hill East is located at 3822 Ridge Avenue in the East Falls section of Philadelphia. An easy walk from the bus stop at Ridge and Allegheny for SEPTA buses 1, 61, and 82. Admission and parking in the lot across the street are free, although there are limited parking spaces. We do have 3 spaces directly in front of the gift shop, or in front of the museum actually, and 1 handicap space. So there are 4 spaces on the grounds, but you can pull on the grounds, and as long as you park where you don't know you're going to block anybody, that's okay too. There's an app you can download for self-guided tour through the 78 acres of Laurel Hill East. Laurel Hill West is at 225 Belmont Avenue in Bala Cynwyd. There's parking at the main entrance and at the bell tower. Public transportation, SEPTA Regional Rail to Manayunk, or one of the many buses to the Wissahickon Transfer Center on Ridge Avenue, cross the Schuylkill River on the Pencoid pedestrian bridge, come up the Writers Ferry Road to the entrance near the Pet Cemetery, or take one of the buses that goes down City Avenue, 44, 52, 65, 1. Get off at Belmont and walk just a few blocks. Well, it's more than a few blocks. It's probably more like between quarter and half a mile, let's say, down Belmont, and it'll take you right to the pedestrian entrance. There are audios that I have done for self-guided tours that you can download. They are mixed among the podcasts, so keep scrolling through the podcasts, and eventually you'll hit those audios that I did. Each of them will take you on a 40 to 45-minute audio tour that talks about people interred along the route through the cemetery. Both Laurel Hill East and Laurel Hill West are now currently open from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. We welcome pretty much everybody, just as long as you're nice. Be nice to everybody. That's the main thing we ask. If you're walking your dog, wonderful. I hope the dog has a wonderful time. Just don't let the dog off lead, please. If you're skateboarding, that's fine. Just be aware of who's around you. I've even welcomed motorcyclists. through the cemetery. If you follow us on Instagram and Facebook, you'll get a daily reminder also. You can follow All Bones Considered on Instagram and Facebook. Gracie does my publicity, and she does a fantastic job. I've managed to accumulate more than 800 followers on Instagram. I've got TikTok promos that have been viewed a couple of thousand times. And by the time you hear this, might have scooted past 80,000 downloads on the podcast. So thank you, Gracie. Once you've fallen in love with the hot spots at Laurel Hill, become a friend of Laurel Hill. You have the opportunity for several members-only special tours that are conducted each year, including some inside the mausoleum visits. They may be cemeteries, but they are a couple of the liveliest spots in town. The key to finding the gift shop online, click on Support. The gift shop is in the left-hand column, and you can find a copy of my book, All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women. Well, you can find it in the gift shop. You can also find it on Amazon, but you can order it from the online gift shop if you're not local. If you're boycotting Amazon for some reason, there are other ways to get it. Or you can always just email me, and I'll tell you how you can pay for it. jrlexjr1947@gmail.com. Our theme song, Names at Peace, was written and performed by local artist James Harrow. All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories, and biographical bites from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories are researched, written, narrated, and produced by me, Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine at Temple University, in about as lo-fi as you can get in the 21st century. I'm literally using a pocket recorder that's used for dictating notes and free software, and everything it's just as low-tech as you can get, and yet you keep coming back for more. I appreciate that. Remember to keep body and soul together until next time on All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories, where the plot thickens. Stick around if you want to hear the references that I use for the podcast. So until the next time we meet, my usual salutations: stay safe, stay well, and stay above ground. Bibliography up next. Bibliography was a real grab bag on this. A few that I got from archive.org, which means they're available for you also at no charge, is the PDF of a tattered copy of History of the 1st City Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, 1774 to November 17th, 1874. This is from a committee that was led by Fairman Rogers, William Camac, A. Loudon Snowden, Joseph Lapsley Wilson. So three of the people that I talked about today were actually on the committee that wrote this 1874 book. It was published October 1st, 1875. There's an article with numerous, it looks like 9 or 10 authors on this. I'm not going to read them all. It's called The 2nd Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry. It's from the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, 1921, volume 45, number 3, pages 257 to 291. That gave me a look at things from the outside, shall we say, from the 2nd City Troop, which eventually was incorporated into the state's National Guard. And then the other general work was 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry by Joseph Seymour. Source On Point, summer 2008, from the Army Historical Foundation, volume 14, number 1, pages 22 to 25. That's from JSTOR. That's not from Archive. But that was a terrific article also, with lots of good pictures of when they were in Puerto Rico during the Spanish-American War, when Huey, they almost named the camp after Huey, Camp Hugh Craig. So what about the individuals? All right, well, let's take a look. A lot of newspaper articles, as you might suspect. But as far as the artwork, the Fairman Rogers 4-in-hand, which is what I mostly based his story on, there's an article called The Fairman Rogers 4-in-hand by Henri Gabriel Marceau from the Bulletin of the Pennsylvania Museum, volume 26, number 138, January 1931, pages 20 to 25, But the one that I really enjoyed, even more than that, was A May Morning in the Park by Gordon Hendricks, Philadelphia Museum of Art Bulletin, Spring 1965, Volume 60, number 285, pages 48 to 64. It breaks it down. It breaks down every detail of this picture, and it is a delight to read thoroughly. I almost wish there were a podcast that was just this article. That's how good it is. And it's about a painting. It helps when you have the pictures in front of you, of course, when you're talking about a painting. A. Loudon Snowden, it looks like mostly newspaper articles, although I did get a copy of the address. Let's see. The need of an elevated and permanent civil service. An address before the American Philosophical Society, March 15, 1880, by the Honorable A. Loudon Snowden. Philadelphia, William F. Murphy Sons. Is there a date on this? Yeah, 1880. I referenced this a couple of times, but other than that, it was newspaper articles for Loudon Snowden. Joseph Lapsley Wilson, newspaper articles, an article called The Arboretum at the Barnes Foundation, USA, Jacob Thomas. Source, BG Journal. What does BG stand for? Botanic Garden. There we go. Botanic Garden Conservation International, Volume 2, Number 2, July 2005, pages 26 and 27. A nice little article about the Arboretum. And the other one about the Arboretum is better. This is the one I would recommend. It's called Combining Science with Recreation and Pleasure, Cultural Geographies of 19th Century Arboretums. Paul Elliott, Charles Watkins, and Stephen Daniels from Garden History, 2007, Volume 35, Supplement Cultural and Historical Geographies of the Arboretum. It's published by the Gardens Trust. Lots of good information about 19th century arboreta in there. And from Huey, it looks like mostly from the articles that I mentioned earlier and also from the newspapers. There was also a habit, I'm going to say from 1880 until 1910. It seems like every year there was another book put out called Great Men of Philadelphia. I think other than serving as a good way to promote people and their businesses, I think it was a way that a lot of printers like to show off what they could do. And there must be at least a dozen of these books. So Hugh Craig made a couple of those books. Both him and his father are in those books. But other than that, it's from the history of the troop and various newspaper articles. Okay. Another long one. I hope that doesn't concern you too much. If it does, let me know. jrlexjr1947 at gmail.com. I can't guarantee that I will make them shorter, but I'm willing to consider it. I hope it's helped that I'm breaking them up into different segments. I find that people like to just mix them on their... well, nobody uses an iPod anymore, but you know what I mean. Just put them on the playlist. There. Okay, stay safe. Stay well, stay above ground, and I will talk to you in December. No, I will talk to you later this month. I will talk to you in mid-November.